Chapter 576, Inner Sanctum. The lost entered the inner sanctum of the Night Temple, its very heart, and bolted the heavy doors behind them. As soon as they did, a field of glowing runes flashed for a moment on the dark wooden surface, and then disappeared without a trace. Sunny glanced at the door with a frown, but didn't say anything. Cassie had never been to this part of the citadel, so neither of them had any information about what was inside. The area was not too large, but right below them was the main bell tower of the cathedral, which was taller and wider than the other 6 belfries. The 2 masters led their people through somber corridors to a spacious hall that seemed to serve as their current stronghold. There were guards keeping watch in front of the entrance, crates with food and water, a fireplace keeping the cold at bay, and makeshift bedding for people to sleep on. Just from looking at the number of cots, Sunny understood that not everyone had returned from their latest hunt, or whatever it was that the sentinels had tried to accomplish. All in all, 23 lost remained, some of them heavily wounded. With Pierce, Wealth, and the 2 of them, there were less than 30 humans left to oppose the Mad Prince. That meant that in several weeks, Mordred had eviscerated more than 2/3 of the temple's defenders. Remembering how confident Master Wealth had been in their ability to contain the prisoner, at the start of all this, Sunny couldn't help but shake his head. Mordred turned out to be more lethal and terrifying than even his jailers had expected. The wounded were quickly tended to, and the lost fell on their cots, dead tired. A few went through the familiar motions of maintaining the camp, cooking food, distributing water, and doing other miscellaneous tasks. Everything was performed swiftly and with trained precision, proving once more how experienced and professional these people were. They were obviously fatigued, both mentally and physically, but not nearly as beaten and unsteady as Sunny had thought. Their spirits were not broken, perhaps because only those with the strongest wills had survived. He also couldn't help but notice that there was not a single reflective surface in the whole of the inner sanctum. The lost wore either armor made out of leather or dull steel that didn't give off reflections, and even made sure to store and drink water from opaque containers, not letting a single drop fall to the floor. After a while, the familiar female sentinel approached them and said, "Sir and lady wish to see you." Sunny and Cassie were led to a separate room, where Pierce and Wealthy were waiting for them behind a wide round table. Both of their expressions were grim. Wealthy gestured to a couple of chairs and, after waiting for a few moments, said, "The 2 of you will follow simple rules. From now on, you are under our command. You will follow any order either Sir Pierce or I give you. You will not use any memory or item that can be used as a mirror inside the inner sanctum or outside of it if you wish to live. You will not conspire against your fellow soldiers or tell a single soul about what you have seen here in the Night Temple. If you disagree, leave right now." Sunny and Cassie glanced at each other but remained seated. Wealthy nodded, then looked at Sunny. "Awakened Sunless, please describe how you came in possession of that piece of a broken mirror, this time in detail." Pierce suddenly leaned forward and growled, "And don't even think about lying to us, boy. You won't like the result." Sunny pretended to look at him with a bit of fear. "I couldn't lie, even if I wanted to, you fool." He told the tale of how he had encountered the mirror beast on the Reckoning Island and almost lost his life to the strange creature. Knowing that he had to give up at least some valuable information, as well as explain how he had managed to defeat such a dangerous abomination, he shared the detail about using the flaw of his own aspect against the reflection, while not mentioning what that flaw was exactly, of course. After, both masters were silent for a while. Finally, Wealthy spoke, her voice solemn. "So one of his reflections managed to escape after all. To think that it had been so close all this time." Sunny hesitated, then cautiously asked, "I am sorry, but what was this piece of mirror exactly? If it was so dangerous, why? Why was I even allowed to bring it inside?" Pierce clenched his fists and stared at him with fury. Then he uttered through gritted teeth, "The inspection was meant to prevent mundane mirrors from being brought into the citadel. No one could have expected that there was one more fragment out there somewhere. If we knew, you would have been killed as soon as you set foot on the chained aisles. As for what that fragment was, it's not for you to know." Sunny shivered slightly, realizing how big of a target he had drawn on himself by picking up the inconspicuous piece of mirror. No wonder St. Tyrus had warned him to never speak of visiting the Reckoning Island to anyone. While he was thinking that, Cassie finally spoke. "With all due respect, Sir Pierce, we have the right to know. Or rather, we need to. How are we supposed to fight against the threat if we don't know what it is? What exactly have we unleashed? What kind of a creature is capable of causing so much death and destruction?" The master opened his mouth to spit a cold response, but Wealth spoke first, her voice calm. "She is right, Pierce. They need to know if they are to be useful." She sighed, then looked away and remained silent for a while. Then Wealth grimaced, rubbed her face, and said, her voice somber and grave, "The creature that you have unleashed, that monster, is Mordred of Valor, the Prince of War." Chapter 577, Only You. After that statement, the room was silent for a while. Sonny frowned, thinking about what he had just heard. He wasn't really surprised to learn that Mordred was a scion of the great clan Valor. He had already known that there was some connection there. He had also considered that one possible explanation for Mordred's strange insistence on calling himself a prince was a blood relation to one of the sovereigns. Now, it was more or less clear that Anvil of Valor was the mysterious prince's father. What made Sonny frown, however, was that Wealthy called Mordred the Prince of War. Was that an indication that Clan Valor had inherited the lineage of War God, just like the immortal Flame Clan inherited that of Sun God? If so, what lineages did the other two great clans possess, and where did it leave him, who was supposed to become the inheritor of Shadow God, but ended up stuck with a forbidden lineage of an elusive daemon instead? Meanwhile, Cassie spoke, her voice slightly surprised. "Of Valor?" Master Wealthy sighed again, then nodded. "Yes. Prince Mordred is the eldest son of Saint Anvil, one of the patriarchs of our great clan. As a young child, he was given as a hostage to a powerful ally, to keep peace and ensure prosperity for all. No harm was meant to come to him, and it didn't, or so we thought. Years later, the prince was returned to us as a valiant awakened, to our joy and relief." Pierce's face darkened, and he looked away. Wealthy lingered for a few moments, and then continued, "But our joy was short-lived. Soon it became apparent that the boy had grown up to be disturbed. He was cruel, uncaring, and had certain impulses that couldn't be controlled. The more powerful he became, the less human he seemed. And he was powerful, incredibly so. More powerful than any awakened was supposed to be." She looked down, then grimaced. In the end, Prince Mordred left the clan and, breaking the command of the elders, sought out a seed of nightmare to become a master. Knowing that he was too dangerous to be allowed to ascend or even to walk freely in the waking world, it was with a heavy heart that a decision was made to eliminate him. Monster or not, he was our responsibility after all. Sonny rubbed his temples. There was a lot of new information in what they were told, provided it was true, of course, which he wasn't sure that it was. Had Mordred really been given away as a hostage? Was he really disturbed and dangerous? Maybe he was, and maybe he wasn't, or had not been, at least. Whatever the case, Sonny had no doubt that it had no bearing on Anvil's decision to get rid of his firstborn son. The key phrases in all the noble-sounding words Wealth had spoken were too powerful and couldn't be controlled. Mordred had probably been forbidden from challenging the second nightmare for that very reason. That was why he had come to the Chained Isles alone, seeking a seed that had not been discovered and thus couldn't be guarded by the forces of the sovereigns, which eventually led to his downfall. One thing, however, didn't make a lot of sense. Sonny glanced at the masters and then asked doubtfully, "If that Mordred was so dangerous, why didn't you just kill him? Why go to all this trouble and imprison him instead?" After a short pause, it was Pierce who answered, his voice grim. "Do you think we haven't tried? His physical body was destroyed, his spirit body too, but that still didn't kill him. No matter what we attempted, that thing simply refused to die. Many of my comrades did in the process, however. In the end, we could only bind him, and even that was only possible with the help of the saints." Sonny stared at the fearsome master, dumbfounded. Both his physical and spirit body destroyed, and yet he still exists. How is that even possible? He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. What is his aspect exactly? Pierce and Wealthy glanced at each other. In the end, the woman spoke. It has to do with mirrors, reflections, and souls. Prince Mordred is able to travel through mirrors and control the reflections. His second ability, though, is much more terrifying. If one looks at him through any form of a mirror, their soul will be devoured, and their body will become his. By taking a vessel, the prince inherits their memories, echoes, and even their aspect. But also their flaw, similar to the being you have encountered on the Reckoning Island, which was one of his creations. She fell silent for a few moments, and absent-mindedly touched the amulet in the shape of an anvil hanging around her neck. Pierce and I are immune to his powers. The rest of our soldiers, though, are not so fortunate. He had been taking one after another, using their bodies to kill the rest. The latest vessel of his was especially dangerous, since it possessed an aspect that allowed him to create puppets out of the dead bodies of our brothers and sisters. We managed to destroy the vessel, but the prince himself got away just like before. We weren't able to use the binding and imprison him again. Sonny tilted his head a little. Now, finally, a lot of things had become clear. Why Mordred had been imprisoned, why the Night Temple was closed off to strangers, and why only the Echoes and the Lost were allowed to guard the prisoner. The former did not possess souls and couldn't be taken, while the latter could not return to the waking world, even if the prince somehow escaped and took them as a vessel. Back in the waking world, catching him would be all but impossible. So, suddenly Sonny shivered. Noticing his expression, Pierce grinned darkly. "I see you finally understand." "Yes, don't think that you can reason with that beast or make use of the fact that his hatred is aimed at Clan Valor, and not you. Currently, there are only 4 people in this citadel whose bodies can allow him to eventually return to the waking world. Wealthy and I cannot be taken, and neither can Lady Cassia, due to her blindness, which leaves—" Master Pierce stared at him with his cold, dangerous eyes. Sonny cursed. "Only you." Chapter 578, Perfect Vessel. "Well, that's just damn great." The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. The worst part was that he couldn't even disagree with Pierce's reasoning, because his own conclusion was more or less the same. Of course, Mordred was perfectly capable of making one of the Lost his vessel in hopes of traveling to the sanctuary or a more remote human citadel, if need be, and stealing another body there. But why would he settle for a vastly inferior option when a perfect candidate was right there, his for the taking? Maybe that was the reason why he had not tried to seek out Sonny in the previous weeks. Mordred might have wanted to leave him for last. Thanks to Cassie, Sonny had a general idea about the aspects of both Wealthy and Pierce. The fearsome master seemed to possess powers that made him highly resistant, if not outright immune, to various forms of attacks, while his more friendly counterpart specialized in enhancing her combat prowess and debilitating the enemy. Noting that only Wealthy was wearing the strange anvil amulet, he made a guess that she was protected from Mordred's ability by its enchantment, while Pierce was capable of countering the possession simply through the might of his aspect. Cassie could not be taken, too, due to her blindness. One had to look at the reflection to be possessed, which she was incapable of. That left only Sonny. But more than that, Mordred had secretly watched him for months, and knew perfectly well how powerful Sonny actually was, as well as how he spoke, behaved, and carried himself. Who were his friends and who were his enemies? Mordred knew everything he needed to know to impersonate him perfectly, as well as how much would be gained by stealing his aspect, shadows, and memories. Truly, Sonny was an ideal vessel. It was almost as though this role had been predetermined for him from the very start. Damnation. He hesitated for a bit, then glanced at Pierce and Wealthy, this time not even having to fake worry. "So, what is the plan then?" The masters lingered for a bit. Then Wealthy spoke, her voice dark and bitter. "We won't try to venture outside and try to bind that monster again. At this point, we don't have enough numbers to trap him anymore. However, he also has no way of infiltrating the inner sanctum, and the vessel that made time his best ally is destroyed. So we will just wait. In about a week, maybe even less, St. Cormac will return. Then, Prince Mordred will have to face a Transcendent's wrath." She clearly was not happy about having to take a passive approach, since in a sense, this was as good as admitting defeat. But this plan of action did, indeed, seem like the best way to go, at least on the surface. All they had to do was barricade themselves inside the impregnable inner sanctum and wait for the cavalry to arrive. Surely, this much was within their ability. Sonny forced out a smile. That is a good plan. Master Wealthy nodded, then turned to Cassie. Lady Cassia, if your aspect brings you a helpful vision, don't hesitate to inform me immediately. Now, please go and rest, you two. Eat your fill. We all need to keep up our strength. Just like that, the conversation was over. Sonny and Cassie stood up, bowed to the masters, then returned to the main hall. There they endured the unfriendly gazes of the lost, filled 2 bowls with tasty-looking porridge, took a couple of opaque jars of water, and found a pair of empty straw mattresses in a remote corner. Sitting down, the two concentrated on the food, happy to finally eat something that was not synth paste. The meat porridge wasn't much, but to them it tasted heavenly. After a while, Cassie said quietly while pretending to chew, "What do you think?" Sonny swallowed a spoonful of porridge, took a sip of water, and answered as he continued to stare at the floor. "They are lying, of course. There is no way that Mordred won't get into the inner sanctum somehow. He is too damn devious for that. I know it, and they know it too." His shadow, meanwhile, watched the figure of the sentinel who could turn invisible to make sure that she wasn't listening in on their conversation. He kept a neutral expression as he ate some more, then added without looking at the blind girl, "What is most likely to happen is that things are going to go south very soon. Wealthy and Pierce will wait and observe for a bit, and then probably try to use us as bait to lay a trap for him." Cassie remained silent for a few moments, then asked, "How do you know?" He smiled. "Because that's what I would have done." After that, both continued to eat, preoccupied with their own thoughts. A few moments passed before Cassie spoke again, her voice a bit uncertain. "So then what do we do?" Sonny enjoyed the taste of the porridge, chewed it slowly, and then answered calmly, "For now, nothing. Let's wait and observe too, rest and eat, just like we were told to. Restore our strength, then we'll see." They didn't speak after that, and, after finishing their food, allowed the exhaustion to overwhelm them. Laying side by side on the thin straw mattresses, Cassie and Sonny fell asleep. Only his watchful shadows remain alert, guarding their master through the night. When the two of them woke up, the air smelled of blood. Only 21 of the 23 lost were still alive. The 2 sentinels who kept watch outside the hall had been brutally slaughtered, without anyone even noticing how and when. Their bodies were still warm, and their blood painted the floors, the walls, and even the ceiling crimson, turning the somber corridor into a ghastly painting. In the center of the pool of blood, a single shard of mirror lay, as if mocking the surviving soldiers of the great clan. Valor Wealth growled and destroyed it before anyone could approach. It seemed that Mordred chose not to hide the fact that he had entered the inner sanctum. Instead, he wanted everyone to know, to see what he had done, and wait, wondering. Whom would he take next? Chapter 579, First Victim. The lost crowded near the entrance, staring at the grisly scene with grim expressions. Wealth was in the corridor. She was standing in the middle of the pool of blood, her fists clenched. Sonny wasn't clear on who had discovered the bodies, since he only woke up due to the noise of everyone rushing to the door and the shine of the sparks of light as they summoned their weapons. He remained at the back of the crowd, using one of the shadows to study the corpses and another to observe the surviving sentinels. There was a thoughtful expression on his face. "I wonder." Before he could finish the thought, Pierce appeared from behind the bend of the corridor, glanced at Wealthy, shook his head briefly, and then growled at the lost. What are you standing around for? Clean up this mess and secure the perimeter. No one moves alone or in pairs, 3 people minimum. Be ready. The bastard might return at any minute." The soldiers glanced at each other, seeds of fear blooming in the depths of their eyes. Then they silently got to work, following the master's command. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then returned to Cassie and sat down on his mattress. The blind girl asked quietly, "Who died, and how?" He rubbed his face tiredly. "The guards. One was the guy who had noticed my shadow back in the Great Hall. The other, I didn't know him. As to how, pretty much the same as everyone else. butchered and cut to pieces. She thought for a bit, then frowned. And no one heard a thing? Sonny sighed. He must have done it really fast. Or his new vessel possesses an aspect that can dampen sounds. He remained silent for a bit, then said somberly, "Anyway, you should prepare." Cassie tilted her head. Prepare for what? Another attack? Sonny didn't answer immediately. Looking at the lost, everyone seemed busy and focused, moving with trained precision and purpose. However, there was a hint of uncertainty on their pale faces. The sentinels tried to hide it, but to no avail. He looked down. No, right now everyone only thinks that Mordred somehow broke through the seals and got into the inner sanctum. However, once they have time to think, they'll realize that there's another possibility. The blind girl paled. Sonny smiled darkly and added that he has been with them this whole time, hiding in one of the two strangers who had miraculously escaped an enchanted cell and insisted on being taken to this shelter. You or me? Cassie gritted her teeth. There's no reasonable way to pin these murders on us. He chuckled. What does reason have to do with any of this? Reason is always the first victim when fear arrives. With that, he fell silent, and after a few seconds rose to go and get them some breakfast. As Sonny walked toward the part of the hall that had been converted into a makeshift kitchen, many gazes followed him. Just as he had expected, they were slowly turning dark and dangerous, full of hostility, fear, and suspicion. Pretending to be appropriately frightened, too, he put some porridge in the bowls. Interesting. Mordred might not have been as crazed as Sonny had thought before. From the start of it, something about how the Prince of Nothing behaved had not sat right with him. Mordred had shown himself to be extremely cunning and meticulous, crafting such a masterful trap that even Sonny, who was an ingenious deceiver as well, fell into it without suspecting a thing. The sadistic way in which dozens of the lost had been killed and the morbid displays of demented butchery that the prince had left in the halls of the Night Temple, however, were utterly impractical and did not fit into this image of a cold and calculating strategist at all. Now that Mordred had decided to reveal his presence in the inner sanctum and sacrifice the invaluable advantage of surprise in exchange for only 2 lives, Sonny became convinced that there was a method to this madness. And as the surviving lost followed him with heavy gazes, dark expressions contorting their faces, he was pretty sure that he understood its purpose. Mordred wanted them to be suspicious of each other. He wanted them to be tense and scared. He wanted their spirits to break. Why? To make their souls weak and their willpower shaken, of course, which suggested that his ability to devour souls was not absolute and required the victim to be what? To be defeated, to surrender, or simply to be weaker than his. What a bastard. Sonny returned to Cassie and gave her a bowl of porridge, then frowned. Honestly, he wasn't sure who was scarier, an unhinged lunatic that enjoyed torturing his victims before murdering them in horrific ways, or a cold-blooded killer that uncaringly did the same simply because it suited his practical goals. Either way, the result would be the same. The lost were shaken, but not nearly close to breaking down, which meant that Mordred was not going to stop. No, he was only getting started sowing terror into the souls. The question was, how was Sonny supposed to stop him? He ate his porridge, then glanced at Pierce and Wealthy, who were speaking quietly near the doors. And should he? Soon Master Pierce summoned the 10 echoes. Even though maintaining them at all times cost a considerable amount of essence, it was decided that the disturbing things would remain among the lost from now on. Several were sent to explore the inner sanctum and try to find signs of the attacker, or at least learn how he had managed to get inside. The rest assumed guarding positions outside the hall, making the remaining sentinels feel both relieved and tense. Not even these experienced warriors felt comfortable in the presence of human echoes. The security measures were enhanced as well. No one was allowed to remain alone, and if there was a need to leave the common area, only groups of 3 could do so. Sonny and Cassie had to recruit the help of the female sentinel, the one who had the ability to turn invisible, just to visit the bathroom. And yet, none of these measures helped protect the stronghold. Come the next morning, 2 more lost were dead. This time, they were killed inside the hall itself, not even in the corridor outside. After that, things turned really ugly for Sonny. Chapter 580, Presumption of Guilt. 2 days had passed after the battle with Mordred's previous vessel and the army of corpse puppets he had created with its help. Those of the wounded who had received light injuries were already back on their feet, but 3 of the sentinels were still in bad shape. Their comrades were doing everything in their power to treat their wounds, but with every healer in the citadel already dead, there was little that could be done to hasten the recovery. One of the corners of the hall was converted into an infirmary, where the 3 heavily injured sentinels rested and received care. In the morning, a piercing scream suddenly echoed between the black stone walls. Those who were sleeping jumped up, grabbing the weapons that they had kept summoned to be ready for an attack. Those who remained awake were already moving, rushing toward the source of the scream, the makeshift infirmary. Sonny simply sat up on his mattress, a tense expression on his face. There were 3 cots for the wounded, standing in a row along the wall. It was the Lost who occupied the middle one that was screaming, his face contorted by an expression of sheer terror. The other 2 were dead. Their throats were sliced open, blood streaming to the floor. Both were killed in their sleep without alerting anyone around, as far away from the entrance to the hall as it was possible, right in the middle of the sentinels' camp. The third one clearly could have been murdered as well, and had been left alive on purpose, as if to mock the Lost. It was as though Mordred was telling them that no one was safe, and that he was perfectly capable of taking each of them whenever he pleased. What? What? How did he get inside? He might still be here. The Lost were on the verge of panicking, but in the end their training and skill prevailed. Instead of descending into chaos, the situation inside the hall immediately turned into a coordinated action. Even before Pierce and Wealthy arrived, the sentinels were already moving to stand in a defensive formation, weapons drawn and ready for battle. The 2 masters appeared mere seconds after the scream. They quickly assessed the situation and joined their soldiers, half of the echoes moving closer, half barring the doors. For a few moments there was a tense silence in the stronghold of the Valor forces. The surviving sentinels waited tensely by the infirmary, while 5 empty-eyed echoes blocked the exit. There was no one else in the hall except for Sonny and Cassie, who had not moved from the start of it all. Slowly, all of the Lost focused on the 2 of them. Their gazes were dark, cold, and full of danger. Sonny's face twitched. Crap. Was Mordred aware of how these actions would affect the 2 of them? Was he trying to force them out into the open on purpose, making it impossible to stay with the sentinels? What was his damn plan, really? What was his endgame? How was he planning to deal with St. Cormac in a few days, and what role was everyone else supposed to play before that? He opened his mouth, wishing to say something to defuse the situation, but one of the Lost was faster. It's them. It must be one of them. As soon as this first accusation was made, the floodgates were open. A moment later, Sonny and Cassie were assaulted by a litany of cries, all blaming them for the deaths of the 2 wounded sentinels. Sonny stared at the crowd of Lost, feeling his heart grow cold. A single person could be reasoned with, but what he saw right now was not a group of people, but a massive creature with many heads, many shouting mouths, and many eyes that burned with fury, fear, and dark, murderous intent. A frightened crowd did not know reason. It only knew fear and the desire to either escape or destroy its source. Ironically, there were very few things more frightening than a senseless crowd. The Lost were much more resilient and prepared than most people, but even battle-hardened warriors like them had a limit. After weeks of being hunted, slaughtered, and brutalized by the elusive and terrifying fiend, they seemed to have finally reached it. Of course, there was no logic behind the accusations. Neither Sonny nor Cassie possessed the means to commit the murder unnoticed, simply for the fact that they had been watched this entire time, since no one really trusted them to begin with. But his attempt to explain this was drowned by the chorus of angry shouts. Sonny noticed Pierce and Wealthy exchanging a quick look. Their faces calm but somber. At least these 2 had managed to keep a cool head, but would that change anything? His heartbeat slowed. Sonny mentally took in the entirety of the hall, the echoes standing guard near the doors, the 2 masters, the formation of the Lost, the dead sentinels laying on the blood-soaked cots. Would he be able to fight his way out of this place? And what would happen next? The forces of Valor would surely pursue him and Cassie. It was at this moment that a sudden realization hit him. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then slowly rose to his feet. His hand hovered in the air as if ready to summon a weapon. That action was enough to cause a chain effect among the lost. One of them suddenly lunged forward, throwing a javelin at Sonny. Another drew his bow. An arrow already knocked on the string. Nothing came of it, however. Almost instantly, Pierce growled, his voice easily suppressing the shouts. "Stop, you wretched bastards! Who ordered you to attack? Anyone who moves, I'll kill myself." At the same time, Wealthy turned into a blur and appeared in front of Sonny, catching the javelin before it could get anywhere near him. She looked at the weapon with a scowl, then threw it on the floor. The echoes standing in front of the sentinel formation suddenly turned, facing the lost. Their empty eyes stared at the frightened warriors, no emotion in them. Just like that, the two masters tamed the wild beast of the human crowd. No matter how far gone the sentinels were, there were still remnants of discipline etched deep into their bones. More than that, the easiest way to defeat fear was with a different, much greater fear. Under the unnerving gaze of the echoes, the accusing shouts abruptly stopped. The lost hesitated, then hesitantly lowered their weapons. However, their burning gazes were still focused on Sonny and Cassie, their thirst for violence temporarily leashed, but not quenched. Wealthy lingered for a moment, then looked at them over her shoulder. "You better come with me. It is not safe for the two of you to remain with the others. Don't worry, though. We'll keep you safe." Sonny pretended to shiver, glanced at the crowd of the lost, and nodded. "Sure, yeah, no problem." Inwardly, though, he was grinning. Keep us safe. What a bunch of crap. Sonny and Cassie were led deeper into the inner sanctum. They passed the room with the round table, where the two masters had first interrogated them, then the personal quarters of the ascended knights, and were finally led to a small room with a single door. Wealthy let them inside and remained at the threshold. She was quiet for a few moments, and then said, "Wait for a bit. I will bring you food and water later. This will be your lodgings from now on, so get comfortable." With that, she closed the door and left. Sonny smiled darkly. He didn't hear the click of the lock, but the implication was clear. The small room was much more comfortable than the iron cage, but it served the same purpose. Once again, they were in a prison cell. However, Sonny knew that this time, they won't be staying in it long. Chapter 581, Bell Tower. Several days passed with nothing disastrous happening. Sonny and Cassie spent them inside the small room, eating the food Wealth or one of the echoes brought them and restoring their strength. Even though they were constantly watched, both remained calm and somewhat relaxed. Outside, things weren't as peaceful. Of course, Mordred had not killed again. Doing so would have only compromised his efforts to frame Sonny for the murders. However, the air was so full of tension that one could almost cut it with a knife. With every day of nothing happening, the already frayed nerves of the lost drew tauter and tauter. Fear, unease, and anxious anticipation built and built, mixing under the pressure of uncertainty into dark, viscous, and volatile dread. Sometimes doing nothing produced the best result. Mordred knew when to push and when to pull too well. With nothing to do but wait for an inevitable attack and nowhere to release the tension, the lost spent a lot of time staring at the closed doors that led to the quarters where Sonny and Cassie were kept, their face growing darker with each day. Something had to give at this point. Even Pierce and Wealth didn't seem confident in their ability to keep these soldiers under control and battle-ready. The two masters spent the time making their own plans. Sonny didn't know what these plans were, since he didn't dare to send one of his shadows to spy on the formidable knights of valor. He had a pretty good guess, though. On one of these days, he noticed that the lost seemed especially restless. Pierce and Wealth were behaving a bit strangely as well. Sonny frowned, then walked to the door, picked up a tray of food that had been delivered by an echo a few hours earlier, then brought it over and handed one of the bowls to Cassie. "Eat well today." The blind girl gave him a short nod. To an outsider, this exchange would not have looked like anything, but the two of them knew each other very well, no matter how complicated this relationship was. Sonny had let Cassie know everything he needed to convey, and she had signaled that his message was received. Not saying anything else, they concentrated on the food. Although the night temple was sealed and cut off from the outside world, it seemed as though the temperature inside had dropped by a lot in the last few days. The cathedral was chilly before, but now the cold felt intrusive and ever-present. Beyond the black walls of the citadel, November was in full swing. It was at least 1 week past the date when Sunny and Cassie were supposed to rendezvous with the rest of the cohort on the shipwreck island, in case Valor denied them access to the gateway. Sunny wondered how Effie and Kai were doing right now. Were they worried or waiting patiently, not knowing that everything had gone horribly wrong? There was no way to know. He sighed and looked at Cassie. The blind girl was sitting silently, staring into nothingness. They were close enough for him to see the reflection of his pale face in her beautiful blue eyes. Sunny smirked. Huh? Not bad. He had looked terrible after crawling out of the iron cage, but by now his appearance was more or less back to normal. He felt much better, too. Whatever fate had in store for him, he was ready. A few hours later, the door of their small room opened, and Wealthy appeared outside. The master looked at them somberly and said in an even voice, "Lady Cassia, awakened sunless, the situation has changed a bit. It is not safe for the two of you to remain here anymore. Come, we have to move you to a different location." Sunny stared at her for a few moments, then asked cautiously, Is everything all right?" She lingered, then answered succinctly, "It will be." Wow. Not ominous at all. Without much choice, Sunny and Cassie stood up and followed the red-haired master. They were led into the main hall of the fortified encampment and through it, feeling the lost follow them with dark gazes. At some point, several echoes appeared to their right and left, as if to protect them should anything happen, or to prevent them from escaping, depending on how one was inclined to look at it. The small procession left the stronghold of the Valor forces and entered the corridors of the inner sanctum. They walked through the maze of them and entered a spiral staircase. Sunny looked around tentatively, then asked, "Where are we going?" Wealthy gestured down. "The bell tower." She didn't add anything else, as if her answer had explained everything. Sunny scowled, but didn't press the issue. What was the point? The staircase was long and winding, circling the entire tower many times. With each revolution, the spiral became narrower. From time to time, they saw closed doors to their left, but never to their right. Finally, after a while, they reached the end of the stairs and waited as Wealth opened a heavy gate blocking the path forward. Sunny and Cassie found themselves at the very bottom of the main bell tower of the Night Temple. Somewhere below them, a massive bell was swaying gently on an ancient iron chain. The tip of the seventh belfry was narrow, encompassing only a circular corridor and one central chamber. Currently, they were looking at its door. The door was slightly opened. Wealthy stopped, then looked at Sunny and gestured forward. "Oh, come inside." Sunny threw a glance at her, then at the echoes surrounding him. He hesitated for a few moments, then sighed, swung the door open and stepped into the chamber. He found himself in a room built of cold stone. It was dark and full of deafening silence, arranged in the shape of a heptagon. Its 7 corners were drowning in shadows, and at each of its 7 walls a large mirror frame stood. However, the frames were empty. The mirrors they had once housed were long shattered and gone. Sunny stared at them for a moment. Well, at least it's now clear where those thousands of mirror shards came from. That discrepancy had been tormenting him for a while. In a prison where no mirrors were allowed? Where had Mordred found all those shards? Where had the piles of broken mirrors that Cassie saw in her vision appeared from? Now he had an answer. Satisfied, Sunny lowered his gaze and looked at the figures waiting for him inside the dark chamber. Pierce was standing in its center, surrounded by the rest of the echoes. His eyes were cold and heavy. The fearsome master grimaced, then said, his voice low and threatening, "Whatever you think of doing, I would advise against it." At the same time, the door of the chamber closed with a deafening bang. The echoes that had escorted them here were already inside, behind Sunny. Wealthy was there too. She was holding a blade to Cassie's throat. Her expression was dark and calm. Sonny lingered for a couple of seconds, then slowly raised his hands with his palms open. Damon, how very unexpected. What a surprise. Chapter 582, For the Greater Good. Sonny froze, trying not to move a muscle. His face grew pale and solemn. Whoa, what is going on, Master Wealthy? The woman stared at his back, the blade of a slender saber pressed against Cassie's throat. She remained silent, as though unwilling to answer. However, Pierce spoke in her stead, a dark grin appearing on his lips. Don't worry, we'll tell you shortly. With that, he commanded two echoes to step forward. One was holding a large wooden box, its surface engraved with a complicated weave of a beautiful but disorienting pattern. The other was holding a folded piece of black cloth. Pierce carefully took the box, then placed it on the floor in front of him and closed his eyes for a moment. A loud click resounded from inside, and its lid rose by a few millimeters. He didn't touch it, though. Instead, the fearsome master sighed and took the folded cloth. Sonny stared at the wooden box with a bit of apprehension. What is that thing? Wealthy finally spoke, her voice cold and even. It is a mirror trap, a very special artifact created by the elders of our great clan. With its help, we can capture and bind the prince. He blinked a couple of times, then forced out a weak smile. Well, that is good, right? Pierce snarled. Indeed, the problem is, the ritual requires some time to be performed, and that monster has proved to be too devious to be held back long enough for it to work. Every time we cornered him, he simply destroyed the vessel and slipped away, because we were always a step behind, and he was the one in control of the battlefield. The master smiled. Well, that is about to change. Sonny frowned. Behind him, Cassie suddenly spoke. You want to lure him into a trap? By using us as bait? Wealthy shook her head. Not you, Song of the Fallen, just your companion. He is the one Prince Mordred wants, after all. The other knight chuckled. He is the one who caused all this. Isn't it only fair that he would be the one to end it? Pierce took a step forward and looked down at Sonny. I don't know why the bastard chose you as the final vessel, but from his actions it is obvious that he is fixated on taking your body above all others. Why else would he have gone to such lengths to frame and excommunicate you? Going as far as to risk sneaking into our camp, the mad prince is ill and unhinged. If we present an opportunity to possess you, he won't be able to resist. The master scowled furiously. And this time, we will be the ones in control. He won't escape us again, so you wouldn't mind making a sacrifice for the greater good, would you, awakened Sunless? Sonny shivered and took an involuntary step back. However, there was nowhere for him to go. Wealth and 5 echoes were behind him, blocking the path of escape. Wow. What if I do mind? Pierce smiled. Then Lady Cassia will tragically lose her life at the hands of the escaped murderer, while heroically assisting the great clan valor and saving lives, of course. And you will do as I say anyway, only after a few additional and very, very unpleasant steps. Cassie gritted her teeth, then shouted, Sonny, don't do it. In the next moment, Wealthy moved her saber, making the blind girl fall silent. A drop of blood rolled down her neck. Quiet. Sonny froze, as if not knowing what to do. His eyes darted around the chamber, as if searching for something to save him. But there was nothing he could use, only the 2 masters and the 10 echoes, all ready to pounce at him if he were to try something. I... He trembled, hesitated, and then suddenly hung his head, as if defeated. I'll do it. Just don't. Don't hurt her. Please. That wasn't too much, right? Cassie struggled in Wealthy's grip. Sonny, no. He looked back, a solemn expression on his face. When he spoke, his voice sounded stifled and frightened, but also certain and full of resolve, almost heroic. It's all right. Don't be sad, Cassie. At least this way, one of us will survive. With that, Sonny faced Pierce and shivered. What do I need to do? The fearsome master smirked, then handed him the folded piece of cloth. Good choice. Get down on your knees first. Sonny took the cloth and kneeled in front of the wooden box. Slowly, Wealtha moved to stand side by side with Pierce, and the echoes dispersed, hovering near the walls as they surrounded him. He closed his eyes. Now what? Wealthy spoke, still holding Cassie with an iron grip. Pierce, meanwhile, bent down and put one hand on the lid of the box. Open your eyes. Unfold the cloth, then look at the item inside. Don't think of playing any tricks. She moved her saber, making Cassie whimper. Sonny flinched but remained on his knees, gritting his teeth. He glanced at the blind girl, then lowered his head and slowly unfolded the cloth. Inside, laying on the black fabric, was a single piece of a broken mirror. Sonny stared at it and saw his pale reflection staring back. The masters tensed. And then, nothing happened. Well, of course it didn't. If Sonny had thought otherwise, he would have never allowed himself to end up in this situation. In fact, he was pretty sure that he knew what Mordred was planning, and why. For that reason, he believed that staring into a mirror was perfectly safe for him, at least right now. That's why he and Cassie had acted out this little performance, pretending to be frightened and clueless, or at least resigned to their fate. Sonny was actually pretty proud of himself. It seemed that his acting ability had really improved. That last line, especially such intensity. Cassie had done surprisingly well, too. Pierce and Wealthy stared at him, waiting for a sign that Mordred took the bait. However, after a few seconds of nothing happening, slight confusion appeared in their eyes, and then a hint of doubt, and then fear. Wealthy was the first one to understand. Her face paled, and she suddenly looked up, as if hoping to pierce countless layers of stone with her gaze, and see the fortified camp that they had left behind. Her lips trembled. No. Chapter 583, Web of Lies. It had taken Sonny a lot of time to understand what Mordred was doing, and why. But in the end, he had succeeded, and thus managed to predict what the elusive prince was going to do, or at least do it with a sufficient degree of certainty to stake his life on it in this desperate situation. Just like everybody else, Sonny had been fooled at first. The initial revelation he had received had to do with the brutal murder of the two guards. It was then that he realized that Mordred was not as insane and perverse as everyone seemed to think. Mordred's grotesque brutality was not the result of an irresistible, unhinged, and sadistic compulsion. Instead, it was a cold and calculated strategy that the prince had employed to diminish his enemies, break their spirit, and make their souls susceptible to his attacks. He had weaponized terror itself and made good use of it. After all, people were most scared of that which was unknown. And what was more unknowable than the mind of a deranged, murderous madman? After Sonny realized that there was such a possibility, the next step was both simple and hard to take. He had to take a good look at himself and admit that he himself had fallen victim to this tactic. Mordred had gotten under his skin. Sonny was more resilient to deceit and manipulation than most, but he was also more vulnerable to the schemes of the Prince of Nothing. Their enmity was personal, and as such involved powerful and destructive emotions. Humiliation, resentment, the sense of betrayal. Such emotions were the enemy of clarity. Sonny had allowed his mind to be clouded by them, and through them, by fear. So, he had to separate his emotions from his perception of the situation, knowing that some of them were a dire obstacle and some were engineered by Mordred in order to obfuscate the truth. Once he did, it was as though a veil had fallen from his eyes. Without it, several things became apparent. The first one was that Mordred was not as terrifying as he wanted everyone to think. Sure, he was astonishingly powerful for an awakened, and equally as lethal enough so for Sonny to suspect that the prince possessed a divine aspect. If he and Nephis could, why not Mordred? He didn't know how many soul cores Mordred possessed, but if his aspect was indeed similar to theirs, there had been much more time for the former heir of valor to accumulate soul fragments and grow stronger. This could also explain why his power level was so anomalous. In any case, it didn't matter. Regardless of how powerful Mordred was, he was clearly not powerful enough to obliterate his jailers completely. Otherwise, they would have been already dead. In fact, Sonny suspected that the Prince of Nothing was in the exact same situation as he himself was. Sonny could take on one of the masters, maybe even both of them with Cassie's help and a lot of luck. He also stood a chance in the battle against the surviving Lost. But he couldn't fight them all together. and neither could Mordred. It was not an accident that the guards had been killed in the usual brutal and ghastly fashion, but the wounded sentinels simply had their throats cut. The murderous prince had not abandoned his barbarous ways on a whim, he simply wasn't capable enough to do more unnoticed. Mordred was not all-powerful. Just very, very good. The second realization came thanks to the first one. After the two wounded sentinels had been killed, and the crowd of their comrades was hungry for Sonny's blood. Back then, he briefly considered running away, despite the fact that Pierce and Wealth would certainly pursue. And this was it. At that moment, he understood Mordred's true goal. It was not to single out Sonny, separate him from the lost, and possess his body. No. What the prince wanted was to separate the lost from each other with Sonny's unwilling help, so that he could kill them, divided. Which didn't mean that he had no plans for Sonny's body, only that he wasn't aiming for it yet. After Sonny understood Mordred's immediate goal, one last thing became apparent. It was that the murderer was indeed already among them. Only he wasn't hiding inside Sonny, as the lost suspected. Instead, he was hiding inside one of them. This mystery tormented Sonny for a while. How could this be, after all? Pierce and Wealth weren't fools. They had a reason to be confident in their soldiers, and that reason was that none of the sentinels had interacted with a mirror or any sort of a reflection after Mordred's last vessel had been destroyed. Everyone was careful, and watchful of their comrades to keep them safe too. How could he have possessed one of them then? The answer was both simple and frightening. Sonny understood it after thinking about the sentinel who had brought food and water to their cage, then lost his mind and tore out his own eyes. The eyes. The eyes were the mirror of the soul, after all. Locked in a small room with Cassie, Sonny couldn't help but notice his own reflection in her beautiful eyes. Seeing his own face staring back at him from their depths, he shuddered. Mordred didn't need a mirror to enter someone's soul. Every human in the Night Temple was a walking mirror. They just didn't know it. Not by chance, but by design. The banished prince had purposefully kept this facet of his power hidden, only using the mirrors and mundane reflections to take vessels, thus creating a false impression that this was the only way he could achieve it. He was a devious monster indeed. Sonny kept this dreadful guess to himself and tried to deduce who among the lost was the real murderer. He considered both Pierce and Wealth, then the only wounded sentinel to survive. Using him as a vessel was just insidious enough for a fiend like Mordred. But then, he entertained the idea that Mordred had not chosen his victims randomly. He had the ability to kill people inside the stronghold to a much more terrifying effect, so why target the guards first? One of the murdered guards had been a familiar face. The lost who had an aspect that allowed him to see the unseen, like Sonny's shadow hiding in the darkness. Or peer through the veil of invisibility that the female sentinel who had almost cut Sonny's throat invited him to see Wealthy and Pierce, and even escorted him and Cassie to the bathroom could create. Yes, Sonny was almost sure that Mordred was hiding in her body. This was how he had been able to kill the two guards, and later the two wounded, without being seen or heard. The answer was so obvious the simplest solution was most often the correct one, after all. And so, Sonny had predicted what was going to happen. Mordred had pushed Pierce and Wealthy into action. With their forces dwindling by the day, and no definitive information on when St. Cormac would arrive, the masters could not simply wait. He lured them into leaving the stronghold to take Sonny away, thinking that they were luring Mordred into a trap instead. And while they were gone, the surviving lost had no one to protect them from the monster hiding in their ranks. Welva suddenly looked up, her face growing pale. Her lips trembled. No. Sonny lowered his head and suppressed a dark smile. At that moment, the masters finally understood what he had known for a while. But it was too late. Utterly and irrevocably late. Chapter 584. A Dark Ocean. Wealth froze, but only for a moment. Then, she threw Cassie aside and dashed toward the door, disappearing in a blur. Sonny was pushed away, rolling on the floor and almost crashing against one of the empty mirror frames. By the time he regained his balance, she was already gone. Pierce growled, then threw a murderous look at him and screamed, "Kill them!" With that, he dashed out of the chamber too, dismissing most of the echoes to take them with him. The fools still hoped that they could save their men. or avenge them at least. Sunny also couldn't really be mad at Pierce for ordering their death. He would have done the same. Now that their plan to bind Mordred had failed, the next best option was to make sure that there were no more vessels for him to possess. The Sentinels were already as good as dead. That left only Sunny. However, Sunny was not one to let go of the grudge. "Curse you, you bastard." There were only 2 echoes remaining in the mirror chamber. One was moving toward Cassie, already thrusting its sword forward. The other was towering over Sunny, its heavy battle axe raised. Sunny glared at the echo, not amused. In the next moment, a Stygian serpent appeared from the shadows behind the creature, wrapping its long and powerful body around the macabre effigy. Then, its head shot forward, the maw opening to a terrible width. Sharp fangs closed on both sides of the echo's face, easily piercing through the skull and crushing it with a grisly crunch. At the same time, Cassie rose to one knee and deflected her enemy's sword with a long dagger. A slender rapier flashed from behind her, piercing the creature's neck and emerging from its other side in a shower of blood. Both echoes fell to the floor, disintegrating into a rain of sparks. From start to finish, they had not made a sound. Sunny rushed to Cassie and bent down, trying to ascertain the severity of her wound. His voice sounded tense and worried. "Are you okay?" There was blood flowing down her delicate neck, but the cut seemed shallow and not at all dangerous. A sense of profound relief spread through his chest. The blind girl nodded. "I'm fine. Go. There won't be another opportunity." He hesitated for a moment, then rose without saying a word, and stepped into the shadows. Cassie was right. There would not be another chance. They were faced with 2 equal threats. One was the pair of ascended knights, and the other was the cursed hellspawn, Mordred himself. Sunny had to make sure that all 3 died today. Well, 2 of them. He didn't know how to destroy the mirror fiend, so leaving Mordred without a vessel was going to have to suffice. Previously, Sunny had left one of his shadows at the precipice of the stairway and then commanded it to hide. Now, he appeared out of it, turning into a shadow himself, just in time to see Wealthy and Pierce shoot past him. Fast. Most of the Night Temple was submerged in darkness now that no one was alive to keep the lanterns aflame. Rushing through it, he followed the masters and reached the doors of the last stronghold of the Valor forces almost at the same instant as them. Wealthy simply crashed through the door, pulverizing it into a cloud of splinters. What met them inside was a bloodbath. The encampment of the Lost was unrecognizable. Before, it had been clean and orderly, somewhat somber, but looking like a well-inhabited space. Now, all Sunny could see was blood. The floor was slick with blood, and so were the walls. Even the ceiling was painted red. All of the hall was one vast, morbid pool of the crimson liquid, with severed limbs and mangled bodies sprawled in it, some of them mutilated so thoroughly that it was almost impossible to recognize them as former humans. The sight of it was revolting and horrid. And in the center of this vile slaughterhouse, a lone figure was sitting cross-legged, a carefree smile on her lips. The beautiful female sentinel looked different too. Her appearance was the same, but everything else about her, her bearing, her gaze, her presence had changed. It was relaxed and friendly, almost polite. She looked exactly how Mordred had sounded, back when he and Sunny spoke in the lightless abyss of the sky below. The dissonance between her pleasant demeanor and the gruesome bloodbath surrounding her was ghastly, bizarre, and deeply disturbing. When the 2 masters appeared inside the hall, 8 echoes weaving themselves from sparks of light around them, Mordred's smile widened. He absent-mindedly threw a knife cut out of a single piece of a pristine white stone into the air, then caught it again, and somehow made it disappear without a trace. "Ah, Sir Pierce, Lady Wealthy, you have finally made it." Then he shifted his gaze and looked directly at Sunny, who was hiding in the shadows near the door. "And you, Sunless. It is such a pleasure to finally meet you face to face. Well, I guess we've already met a few days ago. Still, what an occasion. I've waited for it for a long, long time." He looked back to Wealthy and Pierce, his smile remaining the same, but his eyes growing cold and frightening, as though there was a dark ocean of unfathomable depth hiding beneath their surface, full of harrowing terrors. But not as long as I've waited to meet the two of you. Pierce growled, taking a step forward. You bastard. Mordred threw his head back and laughed. What? Don't you like my handiwork? I've tried so hard, just to impress you. He grinned, then slowly rose to his feet, the friendly smile disappearing from his face. Instead, an expression of dark, cold, murderous wrath appeared on it. 6 years, 6 long years you have kept me in that empty mausoleum. You and the rest of the great noble illustrious clan Valor. The female sentinel outstretched her hand, summoning a simple sword from the thin air. You destroyed my body, stole my birthright, you even destroyed my reflections. Ah, but no matter. I had plenty of time to think of ways to repay your generosity. The things I have in store for you, oh my, when I am done with clan Valor, the word itself will gain a new meaning. Even the gods will look up from their graves and tremble. Mordred smiled, then said evenly, not moving his gaze away from Pierce and Wealthy. What do you think, Sunless? You and I have no quarrel, well. Unless you're still angry about that little deception of mine. I can't really blame you. These two, however, will never let you leave this place alive. Shall we join forces, deal with them, and then escape together? Ah, I could be lying, of course. Maybe I'll just use you again. Then kill that little oracle of yours and take your body, who knows. Sunny lingered for a moment, then stepped out of the shadows, appearing between Mordred and the masters. Wealthy glanced at him with a hint of concern. Pierce grimaced, then uttered through gritted teeth. Don't do anything stupid, boy. This thing isn't even a human. I don't know what was done to him, but he had not been a human for a long, long time. He will consume your soul and wear your body like a suit, and even then, it won't be of any use. Once Lord Cormac returns, even that which remains of you will be obliterated. It's not too late, join us, and together, we can stop this demon. Sunny stared at him for a bit, then glanced at Mordred. Finally, he sighed, took a few steps, and stopped beside the female sentinel. Saint and the soul serpent appeared from the shadows to his left and his right. Together, the four of them, Sunny, Mordred, and the two shadows, faced the two knights of valor and the 8 human echoes. Sunny smirked. I am somewhat of a demon myself, you know. Chapter 585, Clash. As the cruel sight started to manifest itself from swirling dark mist, and the helmet of the undying chain was being summoned into existence, Sunny had a moment to evaluate their chances. The result wasn't too good. He didn't know how powerful exactly Mordred was, but the chances that he was considerably stronger than their enemies seemed to be slim enough to be considered non-existent. Otherwise, the banished prince would not have had to rely on his cunning so much. From how they were positioned and the little details of everyone's gazes, Sunny knew that Wealthy was aiming for Mordred, and vice versa. That meant that he was going to have to face Pierce, while Saint and the Serpent would be tasked with holding back the echoes. He wasn't too worried for Saint, who was an ascended and excelled in defense and durability. The Serpent, however, would have to be really careful. Sunny was most worried about himself, though. He was not going to underestimate Pierce. The man was not only a master, but also an elite, a knight of the great clan Valor. He was as formidable as he was deadly. His aspect made Pierce resistant to all sorts of attacks as well. With this in mind, Sunny commanded 2 shadows to wrap themselves around his body, and reluctantly sent one to Saint. Ascended or not, fighting against 8 echoes was going to test the limits of her ability. That was all the time he had to prepare. Long before the cruel sight finished weaving itself from mist, the blood-soaked hall of the somber cathedral exploded with violence and motion. Wealth's eyes suddenly shone with a hypnotic scarlet light, and Mordred staggered as he was dashing forward. A pained groan escaped from his lips, and his movements slowed down considerably. In the next moment, the body of the female sentinel shimmered and disappeared. Moving with terrifying speed, Wealth lunged forward, then spun, her slender saber colliding against something mid-air. The clashing of blades echoed amid the black stones, and 2 fissures appeared on the layer of blood covering the floor, as if someone was sliding back, pushed away by the force of the impact. At the same time, the 8 echoes attacked. The creatures moved with the frightening precision of soulless machines, coordinating their assault with enough cohesion to make them a fearsome threat. Although their intelligence couldn't compare to actual humans, the morbid effigies retained enough of the skill of their originals to fight almost as human warriors would. Each of them possessed an aspect, too. Saint collided with their formation like a demon born out of darkness, her kite shield receiving a rain of blows as the midnight shard shot forward. The soul serpent submerged into the shadows and flowed through them, appearing behind the 6 advancing echoes to lunge at the 2 whose aspect abilities allowed them to perform ranged attacks. And lastly, there was Sunny. Pierce descended upon him like a siege ram, bringing down his longsword with enough force to make the whole hall tremble. Even augmented by 2 shadows, Sunny was still unable to compete with the master in terms of physical ability, but the gap between them wasn't large enough for him to be instantly overwhelmed. Sidestepping, he received the edge of the enemy's sword on the vambrace of the undying chain, angling it in a way that allowed for most of the force to be deflected instead of absorbed, and threw his other hand forward, the ghostly blade of the moonlight shard glinting dimly as it appeared out of nowhere, aimed at Pierce's throat. The master simply lowered his head, allowing the tip of the stiletto to slide off the cheek guard of his helmet, and pushed the hilt of his sword forward, trying to deliver a crushing blow to Sunny's chest. Sunny jumped back, not at all disappointed by the failure of his treacherous blow. It had not been meant to do any damage anyway. It just had to buy the cruel sight time to finally manifest itself into a material form. And now it had. Sunny thrust the somber spear forward, forcing the enemy to dodge out of the way and give him a moment to breathe. Strong the bastard is just too strong. Through the insight of Shadow Dance, Sunny could see and understand some of the Ascended Knight's battle techniques. Pierce possessed explosive strength and enough agility to channel it into almost inescapable attacks. His understanding of combat was tremendously deep, sharpened by years upon years of relentless training and countless battles. A warrior of such skill was not going to be led into an easy trap. His control of soul essence was also on a completely different level. From what Sunny could perceive, the master was using it with terrifying efficiency, achieving results that he himself couldn't even dream of, especially without the help of Soul Serpent. That was the core difference between them, and his main disadvantage. The only advantage he had really was the undying chain. The transcendent armor was durable enough to withstand a few blows from Pierce, and his high divine affinity only made it stronger. He just had to make sure that he doesn't receive the brutal blows directly. His body beneath the bleak steel was not as resilient. Neither he nor Pierce possessed aspect abilities capable of dealing direct damage, so this fight was going to be decided by skill, cunning, and the hidden aces they were saving for the right moment. Problem was, Sunny didn't really have any aces left. At least none that would work on the fearsome master. He was already going all out. Sunny had a split second to check on how the others were doing before resuming the deadly dance of death with Pierce. He quickly glanced to the side and saw the soul serpent entangled with the 2 echoes, dodging destructive attacks as it slithered around them. Saint was forced into a defensive stance, being barraged by constant strikes as she somehow managed to deflect all of them with the Patient Avenger and the Midnight Shard. Mordred and Wealthy seemed to be at a temporary stalemate, too. Or at least that was how it seemed. The second master was moving too fast, and their battle was too bizarre to really tell. Sunny gritted his teeth. Curses. He couldn't divide his attention anymore. If he wanted to win against Pierce, he had to focus all of it on him, and make sure that the bastard had no time to pay attention to anyone else as well. Chapter 586, Cold Steel. Sunny used everything he had, moving with unimaginable speed, agility, and precision. Both shadow essence and the tenacious blood of Weaver flowed through his body, supplying his muscles with the strength and endurance necessary to perform with such an inhuman level of effort. His mind was aflame, devouring information about his surroundings and the enemy's movements, making lightning-fast decisions, trying to predict countless probable eventualities, and simultaneously studying the sophisticated battle style of the battle-hardened master. And despite all that, he was barely surviving Pierce's unrelenting assault. Every moment he was just a split second away from death. The Knight of Valor was just too powerful, skilled, and overbearing. His cold eyes were full of calculating ruthlessness and dark, iron-killing intent. They were calm and focused, like that of an experienced predator stalking helpless prey. That prey, unfortunately, was Sunny. Damnation! Nothing he had experienced could have prepared him for this. Sunny had fought many opponents that were stronger and faster than him, but he had never been this outmatched in terms of sheer power, at least not in a fight against a human who, unlike most nightmare creatures, also possessed a keen mind, devious cunning, and martial skill that were the greatest weapons of his kind. Maybe only Morgan of Valor, but she had held back, and theirs had not really been a battle to the death. Sunny and Pierce clashed on the bloodied stones, their weapons flashing through the air fast enough to leave after-images behind. The clangor of metal filled the somber hall, mixing with the furious sounds of battle coming from their left. There, two different storms of metal raged violently. One centered around Mordred and Wealthy, the other from where his shadows fought the echoes of the fearsome master. Sunny had no time to look that way, but he could hear the constant ringing of blades landing on Saint's shield. There were so many blows that their sounds almost merged into one dreadful, uninterrupted litany of steel. He had not heard the spell yet, so he knew that none of the echoes had been destroyed. The shadows were in one piece as well, even if he didn't know whether or not they were whole, damaged, or dying. He deflected another strike of Pierce's swift longsword, then whipped the butt of the cruel sight forward, hoping to catch the enemy in the face. Helmet or not, such a strike was bound to deliver some damage. Pierce received the blow calmly and didn't even flinch. Instead, he lunged forward and rammed into Sunny with his shoulder, sending him flying back. Curse that bastard! Is he made of stone or what? Sunny twisted in the air and landed on his feet, tasting blood in his mouth. That shoulder bash was powerful enough to shatter a stone wall. His tempered bones had not shattered, though. Gritting his teeth, he immediately shifted, dodging a powerful thrust, and brought his spear down on the enemy. Fine. This is fine the longer I survive. The better I understand his style. The better I understand his style. The longer I'll survive. The two of them fought ferociously, neither showing any sign of doubt, hesitation, or weakness. Yes, Sunny was younger and less powerful, but he was skilled and experienced too. He was ruthless and cunning too. He was a killer himself. Pierce had managed to land several debilitating blows, rattling his entire body. The undying chain held, but beneath it, Sunny was bruised and battered. However, he had been able to break through the knight's defense and deliver a few strikes of his own. The results were less than ideal, though. Even when he succeeded in thrusting the tip of the cruel sight through a crack in the enemy's armor, it was like trying to cut through a monster's hide. He only managed to burn the bastard a little and make a few drops of blood roll down. Why was Divine Flame not as destructive as it should have been? What was wrong with this monster? Pierce pushed him away, briefly glanced at the shallow wound, and grinned darkly, not showing any indication of being bothered by it. Is this all you can do? Not enough. Not nearly enough, little rat. Sunny growled. Shut your mouth. You suddenly have time to waste breath. With that, he attacked again, this time switching the enchantment of the mirror blade from incandescent flame to invisible, insidious soul damage. Pierce snarled and deflected the blow without too much effort. It was almost time, though, when the master decided to speak, without doubt aiming to distract and agitate the opponent. Sunny had a split second to steal a glance at how his shadows were doing. The serpent was on the verge of destroying one of the echoes and had already wounded another. Saint was doing worse. Faced with 6 opponents, she couldn't launch a successful attack. Some of the echoes surrounding her were severely wounded, but none seemed to be close to death. That was not her task, though. Actually, Sunny preferred that she didn't eliminate any of the echoes. He wanted them all in one piece, constantly attacking the taciturn knight, landing more and more blows on her shield. The patient avenger. By now, its surface was glowing with an angry orange light, as if there were furious flames burning beneath the cold steel. And there were, in a sense. A string of runes surfaced in his memory. Cold steel enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of impact damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash an immolating wave of fire. Well, by now, The patient Avenger received more than enough impact damage to unleash an ocean of flame. A few more strikes, and it was going to overload, sending all that fire outward. Just as Sunny thought that, 2 more strikes landed on the shield, and the angry orange glow turned brighter, slowly turning incandescent white. Currently, Saint was wielding the Blood Blossom charm as well. With all the dismembered corpses lying around, its enchantment had long reached its limit, augmenting all the memories the shadow wielded with rampant strength. Sunny blocked Pierce's strike and slid back, his hands trembling from the force of it. At the same time, Saint spun and deflected 2 more swords with her shield. Its surface was almost entirely white now. Almost there, Dig Dam. Sunny gave a mental command, and the shadow that had been augmenting Saint flowed from the graceful demon's body onto the furiously shining shield. Another blow landed on the patient Avenger. Saint braced, putting her shoulder behind it. Scrap, and in the next moment, a terrifying explosion rattled the entirety of the inner sanctum. Chapter 587, The Explosion. Just a moment before the patient Avenger detonated, Sunny fell backward and dove into the shadow cast by a wide stone pillar. He noticed a hint of surprise in Pierce's eyes, and in the next second, everything was suddenly drowned by blinding white light. The sound came next, a thunderous roar that would have probably destroyed his ears if he had not turned into a shadow. Then, the shockwave arrived, obliterating the pillar and turning it into a mass of flying rubble. Sunny's shelter was destroyed, and he was thrown back into the corporeal world, just in time to be engulfed by a terrifying, immolating flame. Luckily, he had summoned the memory of fire at the very start of the fight. Protected by its enchantment and by the undying chain, Sunny had withstood the terrifying heat. His eyes were tightly shut, and so only his eyelids were singed. The explosion had turned out to be much more powerful than he had expected. Damnation. The hall was completely decimated. The pillars supporting its ceiling had been destroyed, and its walls had cracked, some sections crumbling completely. The bodies of the murdered lost were practically erased from existence, and everything was obscured by a cloud of stone dust mixed with thin crimson mist which had appeared after the pool of blood had evaporated. In all this mayhem, Sunny was able to sense a few familiar shapes. The serpent had merged with the shadows before the explosion had hit too, so it was unharmed. Saint, however, was not as lucky. Her entire left arm had been torn off at the shoulder, the onyx armor mangled and revealing scorched alabaster skin. Fine ruby dust was flowing from the terrible wound, falling to the floor like a stream of a morbid hourglass, as if counting off how long she had left to live. That was the result of augmenting and overloading an ascended memory. Even the wielder was not safe from the consequences, as it turned out. Sunny's mouth twitched, and he immediately dismissed the taciturn knight, then called back his third shadow. In the short moment before it reached him and wrapped itself around his body, he managed to sense the rest of the devastated hall. The echoes seemed to be obliterated. Wealthy was kneeling at a distance, shaken and superficially wounded, but still alive. Mordred was sprawled on the floor, seemingly thrown out of his invisibility. Only Pierce was still on his feet, as if not affected by the explosion at all. His armor was battered and scorched, wisps of smoke rising from the cracks, but the master himself appeared unperturbed. In fact, his murderous intensity only grew more suffocating. He was like an impregnable stone cliff that could never be brought down by the raging winds. Not wishing to reveal himself, Sunny suppressed an infuriated growl and silently dashed forward. The silver blade of the cruel sight whistled quietly, shooting toward the bastard's heart. However, at the last moment, Pierce shifted and easily deflected the blow with his sword, throwing the spear off course. His armored fist flashed, flying toward Sunny's head. When the blow connected, Sunny was blinded for a moment. His eyes were still closed, but it was as if something exploded behind his eyelids, and at the same time, his mind blanked. He only felt the world spinning. Disoriented, Sunny continued his lunge and collided with the fearsome master. The impact threw them both to the ground in a clatter of metal. They flew back, then collided against the stone floor. Pierce grabbed Sonny by the throat and drove a knee into his abdomen, causing another explosion of pain to spread through his body and sending him rolling over his head and away. But not before Sonny's free hand snaked toward one of the cracks in the Ascended Knight's armor and planted something deep into his flesh. A long, narrow needle forged out of black steel, with gold wire wrapped around one of its ends, driven with all of Sonny's strength. The heavenly burden sunk into Pierce's flesh almost entirely, with only a few centimeters sticking out of his skin and barely visible in the narrow fissure, marring the surface of the knight's armor. Of course, such a tiny needle was not going to wound a master seriously, or even slow down his movements, but damage was not what Sonny used it for. Rolling on the ground, he twisted and landed on his knees, sliding a few steps back and almost instantly regaining his balance. A few meters away, Pierce was already rising to his feet too. His eyes were brimming with killing intent, and his long sword was glistening as it reflected the flames burning around them. He was ready to finish this fight. But then, something strange happened. The fearsome master suddenly swayed, a confused expression appearing on his face. A moment later, the soles of his armored boots separated from the stone floor and rose into the air. The heavenly burden was the memory Sonny had exchanged for contribution points after helping Master Jet put down the demented awakened Shadowblade Kurt. Its single enchantment was simple and straightforward. Living beings pierced by the needle would float up and up and up until it was removed. Sonny had acquired it to combine the enchantment with the dark wing and receive the ability to fly out of the sky below, if need be, which did not mean that it had no other uses. Pierce was rising into the air, his feet already a full meter above the floor. His initial confusion was gone, and he swiftly looked down, at the tip of the needle buried in his flesh. The master's hand shot toward it, but the fingers of his armored gauntlet were too thick and clumsy to dig the needle out on the first try. Sonny had no doubt that he would manage soon. He was also fairly certain that the Ascended Knight possessed at least one memory in his arsenal that would be able to help him either counteract or control the effect of the heavenly burden. However, both of these options were going to require some time, no matter how short. The time that Sonny wasn't going to give him. He thrust his hand forward, sending the moonlight shard flying toward Pierce's eye. Without anything to use as purchase, the knight was deprived of the very foundation of combat ability, the warrior's connection to the ground. He couldn't move to dodge, couldn't control the distribution of his weight to mount an effective defense, and couldn't even use most of his strength. However, Pierce still managed to deflect the ghostly stiletto with his sword, which left him open and defenseless to Sonny's true attack. As soon as the moonlight shard left his right hand, Sonny brought his left up and behind him, used all of the strength the three shadows gifted him, sent a flood of essence into his muscles, and cast the cruel sight forward. His throw was performed with perfect form, just like Effie had taught him. At the last moment, the three shadows flowed from his fingers and wrapped themselves around the somber spear's silver blade. Pierce's eyes widened. The cruel sight shot through the air like a black comet and sunk into the fearsome knight's chest. The force of the throw was so great that it went right through his damaged armor, his tough skin and bones, and then his heart. Still affected by the heavenly burden, the master's body was sent flying up with terrifying speed and impaled on the stones, hanging lifelessly from the tall ceiling of the devastated hall. A stream of blood fell down like crimson rain. Sonny staggered, then supported his weight with his hands and let out a shaky breath. Come on." A moment passed in silence, and then he finally heard the painfully familiar voice. This time, the spell's whisper sounded like beautiful music to his ears. "You have slain an ascended human, Pierce. Your shadow grows stronger." Gods, I actually did it. Sonny smiled darkly, allowed himself a second of rest, and then rose to his feet, knowing that the battle was not over. Mordred and Wealthy were still there, both as deadly as the damned bastard he had just killed. He dismissed the cruel sight and immediately summoned it again, simultaneously checking on his reserve of shadow essence. Sonny had spent a lot, but not so much as to worry yet. The soul serpent appeared from the shadows and slithered onto his skin, turning into an intricate tattoo. Still keeping his eyes closed, partially out of caution and partially because his eyelids were burned and hurt like hell, Sonny extended his shadow sense forward and tried to understand what was happening to the other two participants of this hellish battle. Wealthy was standing some distance away from him, swaying. Her hands were pressed against her face. Meanwhile, Mordred. Sonny froze. The female sentinel was dead. He had not noticed it before, but she was laying lifeless on the floor, her neck twisted at an unnatural level. How can this be? Something was not adding up. How could Mordred lose his only vessel so easily? He had only fought one of the masters. Surely he had the ability to defeat Wealth one-on-one. Otherwise, what had he been planning to do if Sonny allied with the Knights of Valor? How had he planned to resist both of them, let alone with a third enemy added into the mix? The Prince of Nothing could not have been that weak. Suddenly, a small detail attracted Sonny's attention. One of the sentinel's hands was clenched in a fist, something dangling from it. A piece of a torn chain. Didn't that chain feel awfully familiar? A cold, uneasy feeling appeared in Sonny's chest. He turned his head slightly and concentrated on the last survivor of the Valor forces, searching for. Wealthy suddenly laughed. Her voice sounded strange and different. And her amulet. The anvil amulet was gone. The master lowered her hands and smiled. Ah, that is much, much better. Chapter 588. Trust Issues. Mordred, he has taken Wealth. Sonny shifted, lowering the cruel sight and slightly turning its blade. His heart was full of unease, his mind in the throes of a dark premonition. The banished prince had already been monstrously powerful. How much more deadly would he become in a body of a master? A few things were now clear, at least. Out of the two ascended knights, Wealthy had been the more powerful one. Her aspect possessed abilities that could debilitate her enemies, all the while enhancing her own physique. That was why she had been the one to sap Mordred of a large portion of his strength and attack him. And yet, it was strange to see that the Prince of Nothing had struggled to defeat her so much, and for so long. If he couldn't win against one of the masters, how had he ever planned to face both? However, if he had decided to take Wealthy's body and thus couldn't harm it too much, that would explain his tardiness. Fighting an ascended elite while not being allowed to wound her was a dreadfully harsh task. Had Mordred been aiming for Wealthy's body from the start? Or had he changed his plans on the fly when the opportunity presented itself? Was his intention to take Sonny as his vessel just a ruse, a misdirection? Or was Sonny still in danger? No way, he already has a body of a master. There is no reason to abandon it for the sake of mine. Right? Ah, that is much, much better. Mordred straightened, then stretched, looking at his own arms with curiosity. He clenched Wealthy's fists, then grimaced slightly, and let his hands relax. Finally, the Prince of Nothing turned slightly and looked at Sonny with a smile. Wouldn't you say, Sunless? Sonny lingered for a moment, then nodded cautiously. I guess. How does this work, exactly? Are you an ascended now? Mordred's smile widened a little. So curious. Your inquisitive nature is truly worthy of an academy researcher. Dodging the questions like always, huh? Sonny sensed the slender saber laying by the former master's feet, then concentrated on the corpse of the female sentinel for a moment. So what now? How are we going to escape this place before the saint arrives? The Prince of Nothing bent down, picked up the saber and sighed. Oh, don't worry. I do have a plan. It's just I'm not sure that you're going to like it very much, Sunless. Sonny felt cold shivers running down his spine. Mordred's tone was still friendly, but the implication behind his words did not promise anything good. Bastard, he's going to double-cross me, isn't he? Well, it's not like Sonny had not been planning to do the same. He gritted his teeth, then said somberly, We don't have to do this, you know. It is just like you said, there's no quarrel between us. We can just go our separate ways, maybe even work together, for a bit. Let's be friends. Mordred chuckled. Oh, I would like that very much. But, Sunless, if you really want to be my friend, why do you still have your eyes closed? He took a slightly awkward step forward, as if not yet entirely used to his new body. It's hard to trust someone who refuses to look you in the eye, you know? Why don't you look at me, huh, Sunless? Sunny paled, then backed away a little. I'd rather not. My eyelids hurt. Mordred grinned. That is a pity. But oh well, to tell you the truth, we wouldn't have become real friends anyway. Sunny took another step back, then asked tensely, "Oh yeah, why is that?" The Prince of Nothing stopped smiling. When he spoke, Wealth's voice sounded cold and insidious, full of endless darkness. "Do you take me for a fool? Did you really think that I would not smell the stench of Dreamspawn on you? Huh? You better tell me, Sunless, why did Asterion send you to the Chained Isles? Why hunt down my beast? What is that abomination scheming now?" Sunny scowled. What? He was genuinely confused. If his eyes weren't closed, he would be blinking in surprise right now. Did Mordred really lose his mind? I have no idea what the hell you are talking about. What stench? Why would I be sent by Asterion? I've never met anyone by that name, let alone knowing anything about their schemes. Are you hearing yourself, you lunatic? Wait a minute, the prince, the Dreamspawn, could it be? Mordred froze, then tilted his head a little. Huh? How curious. You can't lie. So this must be the truth. But if you never met Asterion, why do you reek of Dreamspawn? Sunny grimaced, not wishing to answer. However, he had no choice. Surrendering to his flaw, he uttered through gritted teeth, "I may have met another Dreamspawn." The Prince of Nothing raised his eyebrows, surprised. Really, who? God damn it. Sunny clenched his fists, then said darkly, Nephis. Mordred frowned. Nephis. Nephis of the Immortal Flame Clan. Wait, she is still alive? Sunny nodded, and the banished prince threw his head back, laughing. Oh my. So there is another Dreamspawn walking the Dream Realm, and she is the daughter of Smile of Heaven and Broken Sword. This must be fate. Ah, I wonder if the old bastard knows. While Mordred was laughing, Sunny was feeling cold all over. Not because of this sudden outburst, but because of what the Prince of Nothing had said right before. You can't lie, so this must be the truth. H. How does he know that I can't lie? Since when had Mordred known about his flaw? Had he simply figured it out after watching Sunny for a few months? No, that wasn't possible. Sunny had not spent that much time in the dream realm after escaping the sky below, and especially not communicating with a lot of people outside of selling them real-world items. He had not done anything to compromise himself. What? What was going on? Chapter 589, Dark Mirror. For a moment, Sunny's heart grew heavy, his mind consumed by murderous darkness. He thought that he had been betrayed again. There were very few people in the two worlds who knew the secret of his flaw. Nephis was one, but she was far away. Kai and Effie probably had their guesses. However, they chose to remain silent out of respect for his unwillingness to speak about this matter. That left only Cassie. Cassie, who was right here in the Night Temple and had already turned on him once. But after thinking about it a little, Sunny realized that there had been another being who possessed the knowledge of his aspect. The problem was that it had been dead for a long, long time. The Mirror Beast. The ascended reflection had mirrored his aspect, so it had to have glimpsed it somehow. And it was connected to Mordred far more thoroughly than Cassie ever could be. The Prince of Nothing had not known everything about the Shadow Slave aspect before. Sunny was sure of it. Back in the abyss of the sky below, Mordred had expressed genuine curiosity and surprise about things that he would have already learned otherwise, which meant that he had most likely only received that information after the Mirror Shard was brought into the Night Temple. It also meant that he was only informed about what the Mirror Beast had learned and what had been true then. If this guess was correct, maybe Sunny would be able to use a gap in Mordred's knowledge to his advantage. Or he was wrong, and Cassie had really betrayed him again. A lot of things depended on whether or not he was ready to trust her again. His very life, most likely. Sunny frowned, then said, his voice even, "You seem to be having fun. So now that you know that I have nothing to do with Asterion, whoever that might be, are you going to rethink your previous plans and leave me be?" Mordred chuckled. What do you think? Sunny sighed. Honestly, I don't know what to think anymore. Not when it comes to you. At least you really are a devious bastard, you know that, right? Oh, don't take it as an insult, by the way. Coming from me, it's actually a compliment. The Prince of Nothing shook his head, then took another step forward. Well, a mirror can only reflect what is in front of it, Sunless. Is it my fault that the things in front of me are cruel, vile, and deceitful? I think not. Then again, maybe it is. Either way, I don't really care. Blame your bad luck for being of use to me if you wish. His eyes ignited with a hypnotic scarlet light, and although Sunny's own were closed, he suddenly felt slow and sluggish, strength draining from his muscles. He swayed and used the cruel sight to support himself. Arg, wait before we start this. Answer me one last question. Mordred smiled. Sure, why not? What do you want to know? Sunny strained, as if trying to speak. His mouth opened. But instead of saying anything, he simply attacked. The Prince of Nothing laughed, amused by this little deception. His saber flashed forward to meet the blade of the cruel sight. A moment later, though, his laugh abruptly stopped. Sunny had no illusions about his chances in the fight against Mordred, not when the bastard occupied the body of a powerful master, one whose aspect allowed him to weaken his enemies and strengthen himself no less. But then again, when had Sunny ever fought fairly? From the start of it, he had been subtly manipulating the banished prince. Every step back he had taken was meant to bring them into the right positions. The angle at which he held the cruel sight had been calculated so that the mirror blade only reflected what Sunny wanted Mordred to see. Or rather, so that it didn't reflect what Mordred was not supposed to see. And at the moment of his attack, his efforts finally paid off. Because, in the end, he had chosen to trust Cassie after all. The blind girl silently appeared at the entrance of the hall behind the banished prince. Her eyes were hidden by the silver half-mask, but the polished steel armor and the midnight blue coat were gone. Instead, she was wearing the familiar light tunic and a cloak the color of sea waves. This was the memory gifted to her by Nephis, one that Changing Star had received after slaying an awakened terror in her first nightmare. The armor that possessed an enchantment which made enemies less likely to pay attention to its wearer. Unnoticed, Cassie knelt and placed something on the floor in front of her. It was a large wooden box, its surface engraved with a complicated weave of a beautiful but disorienting pattern. The lid was still slightly opened, rising above the lip by a few millimeters. Sunny suppressed a grin. Good thinking. The box had not been part of the plan, but Cassie seemed to have made a correction when a beneficial opportunity presented itself. The moment the blade of the cruel sight met Wealthy's saber, the blind girl grabbed the lid, threw it open, and then poured her soul essence into the box. Inside, the mirror trap was lined with plates of polished silver, each reflecting the one opposite it, thus creating an infinite labyrinth of reflections. The pattern on its surface shined with a pale glow. Mordred staggered, his laughter cutting short. His hand seemed to weaken. Sunny easily pushed the saber aside and thrust his spear forward, aiming to end the fight with one ruthless strike. However, the Prince of Nothing wasn't done yet. He recoiled, narrowly avoiding the killing blow. Even though the tip of the cruel sight pierced Wealthy's flesh, the wound wasn't fatal. In the next moment, Mordred disengaged, jumping back and staggering as he raised the saber into a defensive stance. His eyes darted toward the wooden box. That cursed thing. Blood was streaming down his side. But the banished prince didn't seem to care. Neither did Sunny. He dashed forward, feinting a downward slash, then turning it into a swift thrust. Who knew how long Mordred would be slowed down by the mirror trap? It hadn't helped the forces of valor. He had to finish this fast. Mordred barely deflected the attack, moving with visible strain. His mouth twitched. Hey, Sunless, why don't you go and destroy that box? Sunny pushed forward, closing the distance between them and simultaneously turning the cruel sight into a sword. It flashed through the air, but was deflected once again. Even with his powers reduced so direly, the prince was still a formidable fighter. Mordred bared his teeth. No, but I must insist. Why don't you go and kill that little oracle of yours? His eyes gleamed with vicious amusement. Lost from light? That is your true name, is it not? Do it. Sunny froze, his sword trembled. Then, as his face became pale as a ghost, and his pupils widened in horror, he slowly turned, facing Cassie. A strange sound escaped from his lips. Mordred smiled, slightly relaxing his guard. It was at that moment that the cruel sight shot toward his body, easily sliding past the slender saber. Sunny scoffed. "Why don't you go to hell? I already have a master." Chapter 590. The Host. Indeed, it was as Sunny had thought. Mordred had learned his secrets from the mirror shard left behind by his beast. He didn't really know of his aspect, he only knew of its reflection. And that reflection was incomplete. That was why the cunning prince had assumed that he would be able to enslave Sunny by using his true name. Of course, Mordred would have been careful, taking the possibility that Lost from Light already had a master into account. But Sunny was half a step ahead. He had doused that caution by being ready to pretend to be enslaved, and then attacked. The cruel sight shot forward, narrowly avoiding the mirror fiend's saber and sinking deep into his flesh. It cut through the enchanted black tunic, pierced Wealth's body, and emerged from her back. Mordred's face contorted, his eyes full of shock and pain. Sunny, of course, couldn't see it, since he was still relying on shadow sense to navigate the world. All he felt was a tremble that went through his enemy's body. A moment later, the Prince of Nothing groaned, a stream of blood escaping from his mouth. Then he lashed out with the saber, forcing Sunny to stagger back. The cruel sight slid out of the terrible wound, wreaking more damage on its way back. Sunny was slightly disappointed that he had not been able to end the fight right there and then, but it hardly mattered. The wound he had delivered was not immediately fatal, but deadly nevertheless. Now, all he had to do was wait for the enemy to bleed out. Even a master's body was not resilient enough to stem the flood of blood he had caused. Mordred, it seemed, realized the same, and dashed forward in a desperate attempt to kill Sunny before the blood loss made him too weak. Or so Sunny thought. What? Instead of attacking with the saber, the Prince of Nothing used it to push the cruel sight aside, and continued to move forward, eventually colliding with Sunny and grabbing him by the throat. Is he crazy? At such a close distance, Sunny had all the advantages. Mordred couldn't slash with the saber, but he could easily bring his short sword back for a killing thrust, long before anyone would have been able to strangle him. This attack made no sense. However, in the next moment, he felt that something was wrong. And then his chest was pierced by a blinding explosion of pain. Sunny screamed and staggered back, falling to the floor. Somehow, against all logic, the Prince of Nothing seemed unscathed again, the bloody gash on his torso gone. Instead, it was as though Sunny had run himself through with a sword. He could feel a deep wound in his chest, even though the surface of the undying chain remained unbroken. See curses. Fighting through the pain, he rolled away, dodging the descending saber. Luckily for him, Mordred did not pursue, instead choosing to dash toward Cassie and the mirror trap. Damned Wealthy. Although Sunny was not entirely clear on what had happened and how he had ended up with a hole in his chest, he had an inkling. Wealthy's aspect seemed to be all about devoiding the enemy of their power, while enhancing your own almost as if transferring it. A master had 3 aspect abilities. Was her third ability capable of transferring wounds from her body to that of others? If so, was he going to die by his own sword? No, he wouldn't. Unlike Mordred, Sunny was not going to bleed to death. In fact, he was barely bleeding at all. His body was pierced and heavily damaged, but fortunately, blood loss was one of the 2 causes of death he was practically immune to. The other being broken bones. The evolved weaves of his body would not allow such a thing to happen. Arg! Growling from pain, Sunny stood up and swayed slightly. He didn't feel too well, in fact. He felt pretty terrible. Every breath was torture, and his heartbeat was strange and irregular. Every contraction sent a pulse of suffering rolling through his body. It's all right. I've been through worse, I think. Sunny willed the midnight shard to manifest itself into existence, and tried to assess what was happening around him. Mordred was already upon Cassie, his saber flashing toward her neck. The blind girl met his attack with a skillful block, the quiet dancer ringing clearly as it deflected the enemy's blade. The blind girl survived. However, she was pushed back, away from the mirror trap. As soon as her hand left the surface of the wooden box and the flow of soul essence was interrupted, the glow of the engraved pattern shimmered, dimmed, and was then extinguished. Mordred sighed. Not bad, guys. Truly, a valiant effort. He glanced at the mirror trap and then brought the saber down on it, turning the box into a pile of splinters and mangled silver plates. Sonny shuddered. Crap. Released from the burden and back to the full might of his stolen body. The Prince of Nothing inhaled deeply, an expression of delight on his face. Then, he turned to Sonny and smiled amicably. Now, who should I deal with first? At that moment, the austere Tachi finished manifesting itself into existence. The unbroken enchantment activated, filling him with newfound power. Its effect wasn't as incredible as when he had been a mere sleeper, but still quite pronounced. Holding the midnight shard in one hand and the cruel sight in another, Sonny willed the mirror blade to ignite with the incandescent light of the divine flame, and grimaced. Come here, your royal highness. I can promise to kill you quickly. With Sonny in front of him and Cassie behind, Mordred laughed. So fun. Ah, what a pity. I am really going to miss you, Sunless. With that, he blurred and was suddenly just a step away, the slender saber falling down with terrifying speed. The two of them clashed, with one attacking and the other desperately trying to defend. The ringing of steel merged into one deafening sound. Sonny cursed. Although it seemed like an eternity, in fact, just a second had passed. The quiet dancer had not even had time to reach them from the other end of the hall to help. And he really needed help. Perhaps if he had not been wounded and under the debilitating effect of Wealthy's aspect, Sonny would have been able to hold his ground against the deadly prince. With 3 shadows wrapped around his body and the gift of the unbroken, his prowess would not have been much less than that of a master. But as things stood currently, fighting against Mordred was like trying to fend off a tornado. He barely managed to deflect the killing blows, but couldn't do anything against the rest of the rain of ruthless strikes. The Prince of Nothing fought with terrifying skill and purpose, not leaving Sonny any chances to retaliate. Well, what else did he expect from the heir of War God? The bastard truly lived up to his lineage. The undying chain held, for now, but Sonny knew that it wouldn't be able to protect him much longer. Even when the quiet dancer joined the fray, things didn't change much. Sonny thought feverishly, trying to come up with some trick, some way for him to survive and prevail. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't think of anything he could do to win this fight. It all seemed hopeless. Slowly, a creeping fear settled in his heart. Ignoring it, ignoring the terrible pain nesting in his chest, Sonny gritted his teeth and continued to resist with all his might, all his cunning, and all his will. And it was then that Cassie's voice suddenly reached his ears. Open your eyes. He shivered, suddenly experiencing a feeling of a terrifying déjà vu. What has she lost her mind? Open your eyes. Open them, Sonny. Was Cassie hysterical or planning to kill him? Why else would she give him such stupid advice? Sonny couldn't come up with one logical reason to listen to her. In the end, it all came down to a question of blind trust. He sighed, then strained his singed eyelids and slowly opened his eyes. Mordred's figure came into focus, a surprised and joyful expression on his stolen face. Sonny saw his reflection in Wealthy's eyes, clad in the bleak steel of the undying chain. No, it wasn't him. There was another reflection hiding even deeper, almost lost in the darkness. And then, it was gone. Something cold and alien entered him through the reflection, sinking deep into the dark depths of his soul. A moment later, the world disappeared. Chapter 591, Sea of Soul. Sonny found himself in the tranquil darkness of his soul sea. It seemed as empty and silent as usual. The 3 black suns burned with dark flames above him, arranged in a perfect triangle. Small spheres of light, his memories, floated between them like dying stars. The silent waters were vast and motionless, and some distance away, just beyond the periphery of his vision, the rows of lifeless shadows stood, unmoving. However, this time something was different. Sonny did not remember entering the soul sea, or even wishing to do so. More than that, he couldn't perceive the real world at all. Usually, visiting this place resulted in a strange split of his consciousness, with one part of it exploring the depths of his soul, while the other remained aware of his actual surroundings. It was akin to imagining a landscape doing so did not turn you blind and deaf. But now, he was here, and only here, as nothing existed outside of this dark and silent sea. Come to think of it was a lonely and frightening place, untethered from the real world and surrounded by nothing except for deathly silence. Sonny did not feel as calm and comfortable as he usually would. And he wasn't really alone in the darkness. What a strange soul you have. Hearing those words, Sonny flinched, then turned around. The voice that had spoken them did not belong to Wealth. It was familiar and pleasant, just like it had been in the lightless abyss of the sky below. Mordred was speaking with his real voice once again. The Prince of Nothing stood some distance away, looking up with a curious smile on his face. Now, for the first time, Sonny saw how he must have looked before his true body was destroyed. Mordred was tall and slender, with pale skin and raven-black hair. He seemed to be in his 20s, older than Kai and Effie by a couple of years. His face was sharp and thin, not exactly handsome, but at the same time charming and strangely beautiful. His most striking feature, though, were his eyes, which didn't seem to possess a color of their own, and instead reflected the world back on itself like two pools of liquid silver. Currently, they were as dark and lightless as the endless abyss of the void. Mordred was dressed in a simple tunic, its fabric long devoid of any color. He wore no armor and didn't seem to bear any weapon. However, Sonny could feel immense pressure radiating from his slender figure and knew that he was in mortal danger. What surprised him, however, was that Mordred's face seemed familiar. In fact, he looked exactly like a slightly older male version of Morgan of Valor. The resemblance was too striking to be a coincidence. It could only be shared by siblings. And there was another thing that Sonny saw which made him tense and apprehensive. All around the Prince of Nothing, he could see a pale golden glow, the same kind of beautiful radiance that hid in his own blood and surrounded Nephis, the light of divinity. Curses. Mordred studied the three cores of Sonny's soul curiously, then looked at him with a friendly smile. I have never seen anything like it. How kind it was of you to invite me inside, Sunless. I really do wonder what your little friend was thinking, though. Does she, perhaps, think that you will be able to resist me? Sonny stared at the invader somberly, then shrugged. How would I know what she is thinking? Trying to understand an oracle is a fool's errand, you know. Mordred chuckled. Ah, wiser words have never been said. Well, I guess we will find out soon. Sonny shifted slightly, then asked, his voice gloomy, why would you even want to possess my body anyway? Didn't you get wealthy already? What's so great about it that you would rather have me than a master? The Prince of Nothing smiled. Who says I can't have you both? That seemed like an answer, but actually, it wasn't. Sonny had already experienced Mordred's habit of dodging questions to be misled this way. He frowned and glared at the mirror fiend, unamused. The invader laughed. So serious, don't sell yourself short, Sunless. You might be just an awakened, but then, who else should I make a vessel if I wish to ascend myself? Plus, your body suits my current needs perfectly. You have an aspect that gifts you both stealth and teleportation abilities. A perfect combination for someone who wishes to escape a saint, don't you think? He took another step forward and continued, I also have never met or heard of anyone else who possesses a divine aspect. Imagine my surprise when I found out that you were just like me, and that thing you have, I am very curious to find out what it is that allowed you to make me blind, back in the Ebony Tower. Such a powerful anti-divination artifact will make my life much, much easier, so. You see, although I am not too happy about it, taking you as a vessel is a regretful, but inevitable choice I had to make. Sonny narrowed his eyes, trying to understand what Mordred was talking about, making him blind back in the Ebony Tower. Sonny had worn Weaver's mask to read the harrowing runes on the 5th level of the stronghold of the ruler of the underworld. Was that what the mirror fiend meant? So the mask had been able to hide Sonny from his spying, as well, and more than that. The mirror beast had not managed to glimpse its secrets. So, Mordred did not know what it was, just that there was something in Sunny's possession that could prevent him from being tracked and seen by otherworldly means. When he narrowed his eyes, though, something else happened. Sunny didn't expect it, so he almost lost his composure. He had not known that he possessed such an ability, but it seemed that the evolution of the blood weave had enhanced his eyes as well. Suddenly, he was able to peer beneath the surface of Mordred's soul, just like he was able to peer beneath the surface of memories and echoes to study their weaves. And what he saw there made him tremble. Crap! As a living soul, the Prince of Nothing did not possess a spell weave, of course. However, what he did possess were soul cores, 6 of them. Mordred was a terror, and that terror was getting closer and closer to Sunny. To tell you the truth, Sunless, your body fits me so perfectly that I even thought, for a second, that the old man had sent you to me as a gift. Gods know he has a lot to apologize for, to think that he had nothing to do with it, and all of this was just a coincidence. That funny attribute of yours is really something, isn't it? Sunny gritted his teeth, and then said in a grim tone, "That is really wonderful. I am very glad for you, pal. However, what exactly happens now? You don't really expect me to just surrender my body to you, right?" Here in the Soul Sea, Sunny wasn't bound by his flaw, since his words were nothing more than thoughts. It was actually a bit of a relief. Mordred stopped, now just a few steps away from him, and smiled. "Now, why? What else now? I am going to destroy your soul, of course." Chapter 592, Soul Slayer. Sunny looked down on himself, evaluating his own state. The wound in his chest was gone. However, it wasn't as though he was unscathed. His body, or at least this manifestation of it, seemed battered and beaten. However, it was also full of ferocious strength and vigor, as well as feeling light, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted off his shoulders just a few moments ago. He didn't know how exactly this battle of the souls was supposed to work, but suspected that his current form was a representation of his spirit. He had endured a lot in these recent weeks, enough suffering and fear to crush someone with a lesser will. Sunny, however, had survived far worse, so his strength was not diminished by much. He was still clad in the bleak steel of the undying chain, and holding his weapons. 3 shadows lay at his feet, and he could feel the presence of the soul serpent nearby. His enemy, meanwhile, was alone and unarmed. This was Sunny's soul, after all. Here, he was bound to have the ultimate advantage. "Let's see who will destroy whom, you bastard." With a smirk, Sunny commanded the shadows to rise and wrap themselves around his body. Instantly, his strength, speed, and resilience were enhanced manifold. In the next moment, however, his expression froze. Mordred looked at him, then smiled. As he did, 6 shadows descended upon him like a dark mantle, making the pressure that the Prince of Nothing exerted feel almost suffocating. "You didn't think that it would be that easy, did you?" A split second later, he was beside Sunny, his fist crashing into the breastplate of the undying chain. As pain exploded through his body, Sunny flew back and fell onto the still water, sliding across it into the darkness. "What?" Before he could even rise, Mordred was already upon him, his foot slamming into Sunny's ribs. Sunny yelped as he was thrown into the air, then felt another blow landing on his chest, pushing all air out of his lungs and sending him plummeting back down. Knowing that he had to escape somehow, Sunny dove into the shadows and emerged from the darkness behind the Prince of Nothing, the blade of the cruel sight shooting forward. However, it pierced nothing but air. Mordred had turned into a shadow himself and disappeared without a trace, his laughter echoing across the surface of the silent sea. Weak, too weak. Something struck Sunny in the back, sending another explosion of pain rolling through the very core of his being. He groaned and tried to slash with the midnight shard, but the enemy was already gone. A moment later, he was kicked in the abdomen, then ruthlessly slammed across the face. Mordred's fist felt like a sledgehammer. No, like a mountain descending. Half-blinded and disoriented, Sunny fell to his knees, spitting blood. What the hell? This was not how he had imagined things going. The damned mirror fiend clearly had to weaken his prey before attacking so. His victory was not set in stone. There was a way to defeat him somehow, and since Sunny's spirit had not been broken, he had expected to be able to prevail. However, the bastard was just too powerful. How was he supposed to resist such terrifying force? Worse than that, Mordred seemed to be able to mirror all of his powers. Bastard, lost from light, stop. The Prince of Nothing laughed again, then struck Sunny in the side of his head, almost blinding him. Sorry to say this, but that trick is not going to work. This is an entirely different situation, you know? Hurting and hoping to escape the next blow, Sunny turned into a shadow again. This time, however, he wasn't in a hurry to attack and remained incorporeal, thinking. Before he could form a single thought, however, another shadow lunged at him from the darkness, and suddenly he was in the throes of indescribable agony, his very soul damaged and cracked. With a stifled shriek, Sunny escaped the shadows and assumed his human form again, only to be ruthlessly struck down a moment later. He fell on his back and desperately gulped for air, but his lungs seemed to be paralyzed. All he could do was try to block the next blow, only for it to fail, and another wave of pain spread through his body. God damn it. Sunny used Shadow Step to disengage, but his enemy simply followed. He deflected one strike, almost managing to cut Mordred's forearm open, but the Mirror Fiend was just too fast, strong, and skilled. No matter how hard Sunny fought, it was all useless. No matter what strategy he tried to implement, Mordred saw right through it. Fighting against the Prince of Nothing was like fighting against death itself. He was terrifying, inevitable, and final. There was no escape. But Sunny was not going to give up at this point. He wasn't even sure that he knew how. He gritted his teeth, endured the pain, and fought. After what seemed like an eternity, beaten and bloodied, Sunny was thrown down again. The helmet of the Undying Chain was bent and deformed, pressing into his temple and obstructing his vision. He dismissed it and raised a hand to defend himself, but it was easily wrestled down. Mordred had a few bruises of his own, but looked infinitely better than Sunny. Grabbing him by the throat, the banished prince inhaled deeply, and then asked in a somber tone, "Haven't you had enough? Why don't you just surrender? I'm not enjoying this one bit, you know." Sunny looked at him through the red haze and grinned, his teeth painted red by blood. Really? Ah, too bad, 'cause I'm actually having the time of my life." With that, he lowered his head and tried to sink his teeth into Mordred's hand. The Prince of Nothing sighed, then hit Sunny in the face, sending him rolling away. Crap, that one. Really hurt. Sunny slid a few meters and came to a rest just beyond the rows of silent shadows. He tried to stand up, but the world suddenly spun around, making him fall back down. A quiet groan escaped from his lips. Mordred shook his head dejectedly and then walked over to the cruel sight, which lay on the surface of the tranquil waters where Sunny had dropped it. He bent down to pick it up, but the somber spear simply turned to tenebrous mist, dismissed by its master. The Mirror Fiend remained unperturbed. He lowered his fingers into the water and caught the reflection of the fearsome memory before it fully dissipated, then brought it up, ending up with the exact same spear in his hand. To think that the spell would make it anew and return it to me. It's fitting, I guess. He studied the cruel sight for a moment, then turned to Sunny, a dark look in his eyes. "Let's end this now. No matter what you may think, I don't enjoy torturing people. Unless they deserve to be tortured, of course." Sunny finally managed to rise to his knees and glanced at the approaching prince with a grim expression. One of his hands reached toward the hilt of the Midnight Shard, which lay some distance away, while the other was pinned awkwardly behind him. In it, a ghostly stiletto silently appeared, its transparent blade hidden from sight by Sunny's body. "Whatever you say," Mordred willed the cruel sight to extend to its full length, then lunged forward, thrusting it toward Sunny's heart. Sunny tensed, preparing to dodge, but before he had a chance to, he was suddenly covered by a massive shadow, and a long, multi-jointed arm appeared from somewhere above, blocking the blade of the spear with its terrifying bone claws. Sunny blinked. Mordred froze too, and then slowly looked up. As he did, Sunny mirrored the movement. Towering above him, the shadow of the Mountain King stood silently, one of its 4 arms extended forward. For a moment, nothing happened, And then, another shadow moved slightly, clicking its chitinous claws. One of the carapace scavengers took a small step forward. Like a chain reaction, a wave of movement spread through the ranks of the silent shadows, bringing them to life. All of them shifted, their gazes focusing on Mordred. Members of the Carapace Legion, dwellers of the Crimson Labyrinth, horrors of the Dark City, inhabitants of the Chained Isles. There were monsters of all shapes and sizes, each more terrifying than the other. A horde of creatures that Sunny had slain. There was an abominable spire messenger, a nest of slithering vines, a tall knight in a heavy suit of intricate armor, a strange creature with a chest in place of a head, and many, many more. For the first time, confidence drained from Mordred's face, and he paled. Taking an involuntary step back, the Prince of Nothing hesitated, then said evenly, "Sunless, my dear friend, tell me, why is there an army of dead nightmare creatures hidden in your soul?" Sunny finally managed to grab the midnight shard and slowly rose to his feet, using the tachi as support. His teeth flashed in a dark smile. "Oh, I have human souls here too. So don't you worry, Mordred. When I kill you, you'll have good company, at least." The mirror fiend chuckled nervously, then slowly brandished the reflection of the cruel sight. In the next moment, the horde of shadows surged forward, descending upon him like an avalanche of darkness. And Mordred suddenly vanished without a trace, as if he had never existed. Chapter 593, One Step Forward. Sunny opened his eyes, disoriented. The orange glow of the fire and the dancing shadows on the shattered walls, the smell of blood, the tearing pain in his chest. He had escaped the Soul Sea and returned to the scorched heart of the Night Temple. He had prevailed, but what was going on? It felt as if he was falling. Why was he falling? Sunny crashed onto the cracked stone plates of the floor and heard Wealthy's body falling somewhere nearby. A tortured groan escaped from his lips, and then a stifled curse. What the hell? Although his battle with Mordred had lasted for a while, it seemed that just a single moment passed in the real world. That time had not even been enough for Sunny to properly fall down. The quiet dancer was still in the same position, and Cassie was still rushing over, dagger in hand. I survived? However, why did it feel like he was forgetting something? Sunny strained his wounded body, trying to sit up. He felt exhausted and weak, both from his physical injuries and the damage his soul had sustained in the harrowing battle against Prince of Nothing. What was it? Cassie was already by his side, reaching out to help him sit. Her rapier hovered in the air, and then turned, the tip of its blade aiming at Wealthy's unmoving form. Oh, right. Where did Mordred disappear to? Suddenly his eyes widened. Sunny raised his head, pointing at Wealth. "Kay, kill her." The quiet dancer was already flashing through the air, reacting faster than its master. Cassie frowned. What? Isn't he D? But it was too late. Wealthy suddenly moved, her hand shooting forward to catch the flying rapier by the blade. The sharp point stopped just a few centimeters away from her throat. No, Mordred wasn't dead. He had simply run away, retreating from a fight that he knew he wouldn't be able to win. Back to his previous vessel, Cassie stared at the Prince of Nothing in shock, and then shrieked when thin cracks appeared on the blade of the graceful rapier. She hurriedly dismissed the echo, saving it from the crushing grip, and pulled Sunny to his feet. What do we do now? Sunny saw the body of the ascended knight stirring, as if slowly coming back to life. Her hollow eyes suddenly glistened, becoming full of dark will and lethal intelligence once again. His heart skipped a beat. Now that Mordred had failed to both enslave and possess Sunny, there was only one use for him left. Torture the Weaver's mask out of him, and then dispose of what was left. With that fiend wearing a master's body, what were they supposed to do indeed? Actually, Sunny had a perfect answer. He glanced at Cassie with a determined expression and then screamed, "What else? Run." Mordred wasn't the only one who knew when to remove himself from a hopeless situation. Pushing the blind girl toward the large hole in the wall of the former stronghold of the Valor forces, Sunny turned his back on Wealthy, who was slowly rising to her feet, and sprinted away as fast as he could. His eyes were tightly shut so that the bastard couldn't spy on them through the reflections. The Night Temple was a large place. With some luck, they would be able to play cat and mouse, or rather mice and tiger, with the damned prince for a few days. Hopefully St. Cormac would arrive soon. As he was diving through the breach in the wall, a mocking voice assaulted him from behind. What, leaving so soon? Feeling Mordred taking a step forward, Sonny dismissed the heavenly burden. Pierce's corpse, which was still pressed against the ceiling, suddenly plunged down and crashed right in front of the mirror fiend, forcing him to jump back and slow down a little. Without turning his head, Sonny threw the broken oath behind him, then sent the ordinary rock flying into the depths of a random corridor, and ran in the opposite direction with Cassie. As they rushed away, the rock ricocheted off the walls and screamed loudly in Sonny's voice. Run, run, run. Sonny didn't expect his tricks to slow down Mordred for long, but with enough of a head start, they were bound to be able to disappear into the confusing labyrinth of the great cathedral. They just had to get out of the inner sanctum in time. Once outside, catching them would be much harder. He might not have been a match for the Prince of Nothing in direct combat for now, but when it came to stealth and traversal, Sonny had a decisive advantage. Not only could he use Shadow Step to jump across large distances, but he could also use his shadows and senses to scout, spy on the enemy, and navigate in the darkness. Mordred, meanwhile, was only able to see through reflections, which were few and far between in the Night Temple. Hiding from him was not an impossible task, especially with the help of Cassie and her uncanny intuition. The blind girl was going to slow Sonny down somewhat, but at the same time, having her with him was a boon. Just as he thought that, Cassie suddenly pulled him into a barely visible mouth of a narrow corridor, which then led them to a small staircase. They ascended it and ran through a circular hall, sliding down the domed floor and then climbing back up. As they did, an echo of a deafening crash reached their ears, announcing that the Prince of Nothing was not too far behind. What was the bastard doing, breaking through stone walls instead of searching for a path? The interior of the citadel was bizarre and confusing, so Sonny quickly lost his sense of direction. All he knew was that they weren't moving toward the familiar exit out of the inner sanctum, nor were they approaching the central bell tower. His doubts were dispelled, however, when Cassie opened a narrow wooden door, and cold wind hit him in the face. Somehow they had reached the grand hall of the cathedral, where the broken gateway stood in the center of the vast basin of the craterous dome. Instead of entering it through the tall gates of the inner sanctum, Sonny and Cassie appeared on a hidden gallery circling the hall's perimeter high above. Almost at the same time, a familiar figure emerged from the gates far below. Chapter 594, 2 Steps Back. Mordred was right below them, walking out into the great hall of the somber cathedral at a relaxed pace. Above his shoulders, a dozen blinding orbs of light hovered in the air, throwing white reflections of the dark stones. Sonny silently stepped back, pulling Cassie with him. Pressed against the back wall of the gallery and safely hidden in the deep shadows, they slowly moved away. Below, the spheres of light suddenly shot in different directions, illuminating a large portion of the dark nave. Luckily, their radiance did not reach the hidden gallery, be it just barely. What it did reach, though, were the hundreds of mirror shards scattered around the vast expanse of the inverse hall. Each of them shone, reflecting the white light. It was as though countless stars suddenly ignited in the darkness. Sonny silently cursed, knowing that those shards served Mordred as eyes. Who knew how many more were hidden throughout the cathedral? Without slowing down, he dismissed the memories he had left behind and continued moving toward the distant end of the vast circular chamber. The Prince of Nothing, meanwhile, tilted his head a little. Where are they hiding, I wonder? Suddenly, he was surrounded by a whirlwind of white sparks. Sonny did not linger to see what memories Mordred was summoning, and instead concentrated on reaching another door. Before the sparks of light coalesced into tangible shapes, Cassie and he had already left the gallery, finding themselves in another corridor. They had successfully left the sanctum behind and were now in the main structure of the citadel. It was a large and convoluted space, so finding them here was not going to be easy. From where they stood now, just outside the nave, they could go anywhere in the temple proper, exit into the outward ring, or descend into any of the 6 belfries. They could even circle back and try to hide in the 7th, the main bell tower, hoping that the mirror fiend would not expect them to return. However, somehow, Sunny doubted that escaping Mordred would be that easy. The morbid remains of his butchered victims were all around them, after all. None of these people had escaped. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled Cassie in the direction of the outward ring. That was the part of the citadel they both knew the best, which was an important advantage. Of course, the banished prince understood that too, which meant that he would most likely be moving there too. This was a risk Sunny had to take. At the end of the day, their goal was to escape, and they could only do that by reaching the sealed gates of the Night Temple. A few hours passed, suffused with fear and tension. Sunny and Cassie had moved through the main structure of the cathedral, getting closer and closer to the outward ring. On the way, they took a short break, partially to eat and replenish their strength, but mostly because he simply couldn't walk anymore. The exhaustion and pain were taking their toll on Sunny. Finding a safe spot, he fell to the floor and remained motionless for a while, breathing hoarsely. Then, he dismissed the breastplate of the undying chain, pulled the shirt hiding beneath up, and tentatively explored the dire wound dealt to him by Mordred. The result was not too good. Sunny wasn't going to die anytime soon, but neither was he going to heal quickly. For the time being, he was as good as crippled. Curses, at least he had not bled to death. That was something, at least. He summoned the breastplate back, then opened the covetous coffer and took out a couple of tubes of synth paste. The two of them hurriedly consumed the nutritious sludge, and then it was time to get back up again. Before that, however, Cassie handed him something. "Here, you hold on to this." Sunny took the item and raised his eyebrows, recognizing the shape. It was a small piece of cold steel, shaped into a semblance of an anvil. His fingers, though, could feel that the thing was not at all simple. In fact, it seemed like one of the most potent artifacts he had ever held. "Wealthy's amulet. When did you grab it?" The blind girl sighed. "After you opened your eyes. I should have tried to reach his body in time, instead. If only I had more essence, I could have seen, could have done something differently." Sunny hesitated for a moment, then threw the amulet into the maw of the covetous coffer. "Why are you so down?" "Yeah, we might have failed to get rid of that bastard, but then again, we've done better than 100 lost and 2 knights of valor did. That's not too bad of an achievement, isn't it? Plus, Mordred's plans are also ruined. He might seem in control, but trust me, that guy is in as much trouble as we are. Things didn't exactly go his way, either." The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then nodded and helped him stand up. Somewhat rested, but not at all free of exhaustion, they continued moving forward, soon crossing into the outward ring. When they did, however, Cassie suddenly froze, then trembled. Sunny tensed. What? Then he heard it too, the insidious sound of approaching footsteps, and a second later, Wealth's familiar voice. "There you are." Gritting his teeth, Sunny grabbed Cassie's hand and ran in the opposite direction. Damn it, damn it, damn it! His chest was burning, pulsating with excruciating pain. They moved with all the speed they could muster. But what was the point? A master was so much faster than an awakened, even though Mordred didn't seem to be in a hurry. The sound of his footsteps was growing closer and closer. Before he could reach them, however, the whole Night Temple suddenly shook, throwing Sunny to the floor. An explosion of pain radiated through his body, and a moment later, his shadow sense was not constrained by the outer walls of the citadel anymore. It pierced the black stone and easily reached into the vast emptiness beyond. Sunny clenched his fists. The seal, it's lifted. The saint had arrived. Chapter 595, The Saints Are Coming. At that point, Sunny and Cassie weren't too far away from the gate chamber, where they had made a morbid discovery soon after escaping from the cage. Back then, the heavy gates had been closed and sealed now, however. It seemed that they were finally opened. Saint Cormac had returned from his expedition to the Hollow Mountains a few days sooner than expected. For a moment, Sunny was overcome by fierce joy. Then, however, the cold and rational part of his mind took over. Yes, the arrival of the saint created a path of escape, and was bound to solve their Mordret problem most likely. But who was to say that the transcendent warrior would not turn out to be an even deadlier threat? The first thing Saint Cormac was going to see after entering the citadel was a pile of mutilated corpses. After that, he would most likely kill anyone who appeared in his way. After all, any survivor would either be a potential vessel of the banished prince or a witness. Sonny gritted his teeth, then rose to his feet and pulled Cassie into a side corridor. There they hid in the shadows, wrapped her cloak around themselves, and waited. He didn't dare to extend his shadow sense toward the gates or send his shadows forward to scout, fearful to draw the saint's attention, so neither of them knew what was going on. A few seconds passed in terrifying silence, and then Sonny heard something rustle through the corridor they had just left. A gust of wind blew past them, as if left behind by something moving at incredible speed. A moment later, they heard a distant impact, and the Night Temple trembled once again. It seemed that Saint Cormac had already found Mordret. Sonny pushed Cassie to her feet and hissed, "Hurry! To the gate!" They ran toward the exit. Soon the familiar chamber came into view, fresh air mixing with the terrible smell of the rotting corpses. The gates of the Night Temple stood wide open, the impenetrable darkness of the sky below stretching into eternity beyond them. The tall doorway seemed like a portal into the endless night. Not slowing down even for a moment, Sonny and Cassie dashed toward freedom, passed through the gates, and finally escaped the cursed cathedral. After a month of suffering, bloodshed, and harrowing dread they had experienced in this ghastly stone trap, the air of the lightless abyss seemed sweet like nectar. Just as they left, the Night Temple shuddered once again, dust falling from its ancient walls. Far below, the bells rang somberly, their usually melodious song sounding strangely staggered and frantic. The saint was battling the Prince of Nothing, the whole citadel suffering the burden of their furious clash. "Hurry, it's not over yet." The two of them dashed across the rickety bridge that swayed above the chasm of the sky below on rusty chains, and soon reached the treacherous stairs that skirted the slope of the northern island. Running up the narrow steps, both of them knew that one wrong step could potentially cost them their lives. But Sonny was unwilling to slow down. They had to reach the surface, cross the island, traverse the heavenly chain, all before Saint Cormac was done dealing with the escaped prisoner. "Too long, this is taking too long." Sonny hesitated for a moment, then summoned the heavenly burden. "Climb onto my back." Cassie lingered, then did as she was told. He drove the black needle between the plates of the undying chain, cursed, and then threw his hand forward, the triangular blade of the prowling thorn shooting into the overhanging stone slope. With the blind girl's weight added to his own, the speed of their ascent wasn't too fast. However, with the help of the kunai and its invisible string, Sonny was able to increase it somewhat. It was an arduous and nerve-wracking journey. The two of them were like a spider scaling a mountain with the help of a single thread of silk. The difference was that the mountain was steeper than vertical, and there were furious winds threatening to either crush them against the stones or throw them away into the darkness of the sky below. However, after a dozen torturous minutes, or maybe an eternity, they still managed to reach the surface of the island alive. Sonny dismissed the needle and fell onto the soft ground, gripping his chest. There were disturbing, wheezing sounds coming out of his lungs with each breath. He lay motionless for a few moments, then allowed Cassie to pull him to his feet. I know. We need to move. It's not time to rest, yet." They ran across the field of flowers, the hollow mountains towering behind them. White mist was flowing down their slopes, and there was something white dancing in the air in front of them too. Sonny felt a pleasant cold spreading across his burning face. His heart contracted painfully. Snow. It's snowing. Was it December already? Or did the first snowfall arrive ahead of time as well? There was no escaping fate. The northern island trembled beneath them, and just a few moments later, a dark figure appeared in their way. Sonny had never met Saint Cormac, but he recognized him almost instantly. Only a transcended could have such a deep, unfathomable shadow, and a presence that seemed to affect the very world around him. The saint looked to be in his 30s, with a cold face and dark, ruthless eyes. His black armor was battered and worn, barely holding together after a month of exploring the death zone. Surprisingly, it wasn't too impressive, as far as armor-type memories went. Neither was he wielding a terrifying weapon. His fingers, however, were covered with fresh blood, crimson drops falling down and painting the delicate violet flowers red. It seemed that Mordred had failed to gain freedom. In the end, his last vessel was destroyed. Saint Cormac frowned, looking at the two of them, then took a step forward. The snow swirled, surrounding him like a cold mantle. Sonny was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of suffocating, killing intent. He shifted slightly, pushing Cassie behind him. His eyes darted around, hoping to find anything that would save their lives. Then, suddenly, the world darkened, as though a transient shadow covered the sun. A second later, the shadow was gone in a rustle of wings, and a tall, slender woman was standing between them and the approaching saint, her posture straight like an arrow. Skytide shielded Sonny and Cassie with her body and glanced at the other transcended warrior, her beautiful face as cold and stark as always, her vertical pupils full of calm, grim resolve. That is enough, Cormac. Turn back. Chapter 596. And we were gone. Sonny staggered back, stunned by the sudden appearance of Saint Tyrus. A tense, dangerous silence settled over the island after she spoke, with only the wailing of the wind breaking it. Snow danced in the air, slowly settling onto the cold ground. His heart was beating like a caged animal. Where did she come from? What is going on, damn it? Cormac scowled and looked at the slender woman with a dark expression on his stern, weathered face. The saint did not seem amused by the sudden appearance of the leader of the White Feather clan. Skytide, stay out of this. Saint Tyrus didn't move, still shielding Sonny and Cassie with her slender body. The wind picked up, and the clouds seemed to become heavier, as if expressing her suppressed emotions. Only, as Sonny realized, they weren't suppressed at all. Skytide just didn't show them on her face. Instead, the world itself did it for her. I think not. Cormac winced, resentful sparks appearing in his eyes. You don't know what you are interfering with, Tyrus. Get out of my way. This is not your business. She shifted slightly, the howling of wind growing louder. The violet flowers bent, pressed down to the ground. This is my land. These awakened are of my citadel. Anything that happens here and to them is my business. The other saint sighed, then took a step forward. The entire garrison of the Night Temple was wiped out. These two are the only witnesses. Are you sure that you want to make their fate your burden? Skytide frowned, then spoke, her voice even. If that is true, we can question them together, back in the sanctuary. Cormac smiled darkly, then shook his head. I'm afraid that won't be convenient. You might not know my task here, Tyrus, but you know who gave it to me. Obstructing me in this matter is the same as obstructing the will of valor. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? A corner of Skytide's mouth suddenly twisted upward. She stared at the fearsome saint and said, a hint of mocking in her voice, "What is he going to do? How is he going to punish me? Exile my clan to a remote frontier region, maybe. Oh, wait." She took a step forward as well, her tone changing, becoming darker and heavier. The clouds swallowed the sun, submerging the world into shadows. You have forgotten, Cormac. I am Skytide of the White Feather clan, not Valor. I am a vassal of the king, not his servant. 6 years ago, I looked the other way and allowed your odious scheme to happen. I have regretted it ever since. This is my land, my isles. You are only a guest here. I warn you, do not test the limits of my hospitality. As she spoke the last words, a deafening thunderclap resounded, rolling across the chained aisles like a herald of heavenly wrath. Cormac stared at her, unimpressed. An expression of contempt appeared in the depths of his cold, dangerous eyes. The saint moved his shoulders as if stretching his muscles, and then said darkly, Your arrogance is so tiresome, Tyrus. Warn me? What gives you the courage to warn me? You say that I have forgotten, but it is you who doesn't seem to remember who I am, what I am. and what I am capable of. He stepped forward, his killing intent growing thicker and more suffocating, almost palpable. What gave you the idea that this is a negotiation? You will stand down, or I will put you down. Either way, the result will be the same. Saint Tyrus lingered for a moment, then looked over her shoulder at Sunny and Cassie. Her gaze was calm and somber. It's time for the two of you to go. Sunny took a step back, his mouth suddenly dry. He opened it, trying to force out a question. But what about? Skytide was already looking at Cormac, who was approaching with steady steps. Her hair danced in the wind like a stream of pale gold. Run. You won't survive the fury of this battle. Sunny hesitated for a split second, then grabbed Cassie and ran. They dashed away from the two saints, heading for the distant edge of the island. He didn't know what a fight between transcendents would look like, but had no doubt that mere mortals like the two of them had no place in the middle of it. Crazy, the world has gone completely crazy. A moment later, something collided with a thunderous roar behind them, and Sunny was thrown into the air. A violent shockwave passed through his body, causing a short scream to escape from his mouth. He hit the ground and felt it shifting, as if a powerful earthquake was happening mere meters away. Sunny struggled to rise back to his feet, then helped Cassie do the same and continued to run. Shards of stone flew past them like bullets, and the snowfall was already turning into a furious blizzard. Behind them, two vast shadows rose into the sky. One was a giant bird of prey, her feathers white, her sharp beak and devastating talons forged out of lustrous, polished steel. Her enormous wings were wreathed in thunderclouds, and bolts of lightning danced around her body like a radiant mantle. The other was a ferocious wyvern, his black scales as dark as the abyss, with mighty muscles rolling under them like iron chains. The head of the creature was crowned with twisting horns, and in his maw, countless sharp fangs glowed darkly, illuminated by immolating red flame burning in the depths of the beast's adamantine body. Tyrus and Cormac flew into the skies, soon disappearing in the veil of storm clouds. A terrifying roar rolled across the island, and then another shockwave hit, tearing a hole in the blizzard. Boiling blood suddenly streamed from above, falling on the snow like vermilion rain. Gods, oh gods, Sunny and Cassie could only run. From time to time, a violent tremor threw them to the ground. The hurricane wind threw snow and sharp bits of ice into their faces, and their ears were ringing from the thunderous cacophony of the titanic battle happening somewhere above them. They were almost to the edge of the island, ready to jump onto the chain, when there was a sudden lull in the terrifying havoc. And then, two shadows fell down from the skies, so fast that Sunny couldn't even tell who was who. The saints collided against the center of the island with such force that its surface swayed like water. The shockwave of the impact was so fierce that it instantly obliterated the field of flowers, blew away the top layers of the soil, and made the stronghold on the northern edge crumble into dust. The ground itself split open, a wide crack spreading to both ends of the isle, cutting it in two. The northern island shuddered, and then crumbled, large pieces of stone breaking off and flying into the darkness as more and more cracks appeared, and the tension of the heavenly chains tore the island apart. Sunny, of course, could not appreciate the full scope of the disaster. All he could sense was that they were sent rolling down once again, this time even more violently than before. Only this time, instead of soil or stone, what they found beneath them was nothing. The ground disappeared, and Sunny found himself falling down, 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 into the endless darkness of the sky below. All he could do was grab Cassie and hold her close, making sure that they weren't separated. Bloodied, mangled and weak, they plummeted into the abyss as all around them. Devastation reigned. The night temple cracked, then disintegrated into a rain of black stones. The 7 bells rang mournfully as they disappeared into the void. The colossal chain that served as one of the anchors of the chained isles shot toward the hollow mountains, colliding with their slopes with enough force to make the ancient slope shatter and create a momentary hole in the veil of flowing mist. Luckily for Sunny, his eyes were still closed, so he didn't see what hid beneath. And somewhere in all this chaos, the two saints continued their harrowing battle. Sunny held Cassie tightly and fell, happy to be getting further and further away from that clash with each second. After a while, the sounds of the fighting disappeared far above. The signs of destruction disappeared too, as well as the last remnants of the light. Now, they were falling through absolute darkness in complete silence and solitude, with nothing threatening their lives. It was sort of peaceful. Sonny sighed, finally allowed himself to open his eyes, then glanced at Cassie and forced out a weak smile. "See, we're not dead. Your vision was a bust again." She trembled. How are you so calm? We are falling into the sky below." "Not dead yet." He tried to laugh, then winced and decided against it. "This place is actually not so bad. Just wait for a little. We'll fall for a bit more, and then I'll summon memories to either guide us back up or push us toward the rift. We have food and water. At least you won't believe what I had to eat the last time." Remembering the dead mimic, Sonny shivered. "Yeah, this is definitely not bad. Believe me, it could have been so much worse." However, as soon as Sonny said that, something changed in the lightless void. A swift shadow shot toward them, surrounded by a circle of furious light. "What?" Before Sonny could even react, two hands extended toward them, one grabbing him, the other closing around the nape of Cassie's cloak. With nothing to stand on, they were as defenseless as Pierce had been moments before Sonny killed him. "Damna. Oh, thank gods I found you." He blinked. That voice, why did it sound familiar? Sonny stared into the light, his eyes slowly adjusting to it. Soon he was able to see the shape of a paper lantern that floated in the air, just above the shoulder of a tall, infuriatingly handsome young man in a needlessly fashionable armor. Sonny opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "Kai, what the hell are you doing here?" The charming archer smiled, an expression of joy and profound relief appearing on his face. "What else? Rescuing you, of course." Chapter 597, Welcome Aboard. "Hold on for a bit more." The archer strained a little, bearing their weight as he darted through the abyss, his flight swift and effortless. Illuminated by the paper lantern, the three of them traveled through the darkness like a small comet, moving faster and faster. The wind whistled in Sonny's ears. He remained silent for a bit, dumbfounded, then asked, "Wait, was it you who brought St. Tyrus here?" Kai smiled, looking somewhere far away. "Of course. When you and Cassie didn't return to the real world, we knew that the negotiation with the representatives of Clan Valor must have failed. But when you didn't arrive at Shipwreck Island by November as the plan had been, it was clear that something went wrong. So Effie and I waited for a bit, then went to the White Feather Clan for help." He paused for a moment, and then added, "Eventually we decided to come to the Night Temple ourselves. That was a week ago. We have just arrived yesterday. But the citadel was sealed." Sonny frowned, suddenly catching an inconsistency in Kai's words. "Wait, a week ago? How did you cross the chained aisles so fast?" The archer smiled brightly. "Look ahead." "What does he—" Sonny glanced forward and froze. They were swiftly approaching another source of light, this one much larger. Or rather, it was moving in their direction, even faster than Kai was flying. A few moments later, a graceful shape of a resplendent wooden ship became visible, flowing through the darkness of the sky below as though on water. Its sails were pristine white, and around the main mast a young tree was growing, its branches brimming with vibrant green leaves. The firekeepers had succeeded in repairing the ancient vessel after all, it seemed. It looked elegant and swift, its hull devoid of the cracks and breaches that had marred its surface before. A patchwork of replacement boards still stood out on the polished wood, and here and there, the structure of the ship seemed rickety and slapdash, especially near the bow, which had been previously almost destroyed. However, overall, the vessel was a magnificent sight to behold. There was a battery of light, memories illuminating the ship, an especially bright one burning at the tip of a long and sharp bowsprit. Human figures could be seen on the deck, moving around in a hurry. Sonny stared at the swiftly approaching ship, stunned by the sight of it. It was hard to believe that this had been the same abomination-infested wreck he knew. Now that the ancient vessel was repaired, it looked almost the same as on the golden coins he had sacrificed to the altar of Noctis. Kai accelerated even more. then slowed down and landed on the wooden deck smoothly. Feeling a solid surface under his feet, Sonny swayed a little and looked at the firekeepers that surrounded them. Then, he sighed and fell down, instantly losing consciousness. After the terrible day, no, the terrible month he had, some rest was long overdue. A couple of hours later, Sonny came back to his senses. He was laying near the main mast of the ship, under the branches of the young tree, a soft pillow under his head and a warm blanket covering his body. He still felt terrible, but mostly due to the soul damage Mordred had dealt him. The physical wounds were not bothering him too much anymore. It seemed that while Sonny was out of it, the healer of the firekeepers, Shim, had treated him. "I am actually alive. What a miracle." He grimaced and sat up, then stared into the darkness for a bit. The ancient vessel was swiftly flying through the abyss, descending into its depths. Due to that, his body felt nice and weightless. Sonny dismissed the outer layer of the undying chain and studied his chest, where the terrible wound had already closed, be it just barely. Now that he was conscious, he would be able to stitch it up, or at least cover the gash with a bandage, as well as properly take care of the countless smaller injuries on his body. Satisfied with his state, Sonny looked around, noticing Cassie sleeping nearby. Her face was calm and peaceful. He remained still for a few moments, coming to terms with the fact that their harrowing adventure seemed to be over. Of course, in the future, he was going to have to deal with its consequences, and even before that, the second nightmare awaited, perhaps much more terrifying. But at least they were free of the damned Night Temple. What a fiasco! He didn't get to dwell on his frustration for long, however, because a delicious smell suddenly reached his nostrils, and a few moments later, Effie appeared nearby, carrying 2 plates of something that seemed like real, freshly cooked food. Sonny's eyes glistened, and his mouth instantly watered. The huntress grinned and handed him a plate. "Here you go, doofus. Welcome aboard." He flashed her a smile, and then attacked the food like a ravenous beast. Effie sat down on the deck and placed the second plate near Cassie, who stirred awake soon after. A few minutes were spent in silence, disturbed only by the sound of energetic chewing. At some point, Kai landed nearby and joined them, an easygoing smile on his face. Finally, Sonny was done with his meal and pushed the plate away. "Hey, Effie, about that marriage proposal of yours, I might have changed my mind," she scoffed. "Pooh, you wish." He chuckled, then glanced into the darkness that surrounded them from all sides. "From the fact that we're descending, I get it that we are going toward the Ebony Tower." Kai nodded. "Yes. We are moving down and toward the tier, as fast as we can. You will have to guide us to the rift in the flames once we reach them. Whatever had happened in the Night Temple, we thought that ascending should take priority. Not to mention that facing the fallout as masters might change everything." Sonny remained silent for a bit, then smiled crookedly. "Good thinking." As soon as he said it, though, his face darkened. Sonny suddenly looked up and then paled a little. "Get ready. Something is approaching." They hurriedly stood up and summoned their weapons. The firekeepers did the same, staring into the darkness with tense faces. A few moments later, something landed on the deck with a wet thud. Sharp fangs glistened, reflecting the light of the lanterns. It was the head of a giant black wyvern, torn viciously at the neck. Its eyes were glassy and empty, and its tongue hung lifelessly out of the terrifying maw, the red flames that had once burned within it gone. Saint Cormac was dead. The realization sent a shiver through Sonny's body, and a split second later, Sky Tide was suddenly standing above the head of the slain transcendent, her face cold and expressionless. Tyrus looked battered, her graceful armor torn and bloodied. Her golden hair was disheveled, some strands of it painted red. Her presence, however, was unchanged. It was calm and steady. She looked at the 4 of them and frowned. Then, her gaze slid lower and focused on the empty plates. "Do you have more food? Bring it. I am famished." Chapter 598, Broken Balance. As the saint ate, not at all perturbed by the head of the terrifying wyvern staring at her with dead eyes, the rest of them stood awkwardly and waited for her to satiate her hunger. Sunny observed Skytide with a somber expression, then glanced at what remained of the fearsome, transcendent Cormac. His heart was heavy. Damnation. Being the cause of 100 lost and 2 masters dying, one of them by his own hand no less, was already bad enough, not to mention that the whereabouts of the sole prisoner of the Night Temple, Prince Mordred, were currently unknown also as the direct result of Sunny's actions. But causing the demise of a saint was nothing short of an utter disaster. Saints were irreplaceable. In all of humanity there were just a few dozen. Cormac's death was not going to go unnoticed or unpunished. Would I even be able to return to the real world? Skytide finally finished her meal, then drank some water, and glanced at Cassie and him. What exactly happened in the Night Temple? The two of them looked at each other. After a few moments, Sunny spoke, his voice somber. Everything went wrong from the very start. As soon as we arrived, one of the masters discovered a piece of mirror in my belongings. That shard, I picked it up on Reckoning Island. There was apparently a person imprisoned in the citadel, and he escaped his bindings with the help of the mirror I delivered. Somehow. He paused and studied the saint's face, trying to ascertain if she had known what would happen. Tyrus certainly knew of the mirror beast, however. She could not have known that Sunny used to carry the mirror shard the creature had left behind. His attempt to read anything on her face failed, so he was left without an answer. With a sigh, Sunny continued, "The masters destroyed the gateway and sealed the temple. After that, the escaped prisoner slaughtered the lost and took possession of a master's body. He even stole the knife from the shattered altar. In the end, it was just the 3 of us left alive, and he would have probably killed us too, but St. Cormac arrived just in time. You know the rest." St. Tyrus stared at him for a few moments, then shook her head. "So the prince still lives, how could this be?" She frowned and looked straight at him. "Where is he now?" Sunny shrugged. "That we don't know. St. Cormac must have destroyed his body, but as to where his soul went, your guess is as good as mine. He is probably hiding in one of the mirror shards, falling into the sky below with the rest of the Night Temple as we speak." Skytide remained silent for a while, then sighed. "I see you did well to survive. Don't worry about the rest, there are no witnesses left, and even the citadel itself is gone. I will deal with the fallout as well as I can. However, it will be good for the 2 of you to disappear for a while. Proceed to the Seed of Nightmare as you have planned, and challenge it. By the time you return, if you do, the worst part will be over. The situation will be different, too." She rose and glanced into the darkness of the sky below, a somber expression on her face. "Now that the hollow mountain's anchor is no more, the chained isles will shift and change position. That will cause a mass migration of the nightmare creatures, both those from the surface and those from the dark side. Even some of the corrupted abominations might move to new hunting grounds. I will have my hands full for the foreseeable future, so we won't see each other again for a long time. Good luck to you." Sunny stared at the beautiful saint, then at the head of the wyvern. He cleared his throat. "I am sorry, Lady Skytide, but won't you be in trouble? Killing a saint is not something that can be simply forgiven, no matter your status, right?" Tyrus lingered, then shook her head. "I will be punished, sure, but not too severely. Do you understand why?" Sunny glanced at his friends, who had the same confused expressions. "Not really," she sighed. Were 12 saints who swore loyalty to the great clan Valor. 1 less than those who are sworn to the great clan Song. Now there are 11, while Song still has 13. With Song Seishan back from the Forgotten Shore, that number will soon increase even further, while Lady Morgan is still too young and lacks the experience to challenge the 3rd nightmare. The balance of power will be broken. Sunny listened to her words attentively. So the great clans are at odds with each other. The 2 strongest are, at least. Makes sense. Skytide frowned, remained silent for a few moments, and then said, "With the gap widening so drastically, Valor can't allow to lose me, or any more of their saints. So, I will be fine, more or less. That is also the reason why you will be too." He raised an eyebrow. "Us? What do we have to do with any of this?" Tyrus smiled slightly, looking at him. "Cassie, Effie, and Kai. Right now, the 4 of you are just people who have raw potential. You are valuable, but not irreplaceable. However, should you survive the second nightmare and ascend, you will prove that you have the courage, skill, and determination to realize that potential. You will prove that you can be saints and thus become precious. When you return, the great clans will not only be unwilling to eliminate you, they'll be fighting for the right to have you. Sunny scowled, connecting that statement with what Master Jet had told him before. His eyes grew bleak. What if we don't want to be had? Skytide looked at him for a while, then turned away. Her voice sounded even. Then you are out of luck. With that, she jumped up. A gust of cold wind suddenly enveloped the deck of the flying ship, and a moment later, a massive shadow separated from it and shot upward, soon disappearing into the distance. Sunny, Cassie, Effie, Kai, and the firekeepers were left standing in the darkness alone. After some time, the huntress shifted and sighed heavily. She ate all my food. What a disaster. What a tragedy. Chapter 599. The Flying Ship. The flying ship soared through the darkness, descending deeper and deeper into the empty void. After St. Tyrus had left, nothing much happened for a long time. They were surrounded by nothing, and nothing bothered them. This was the oppressive nothingness that Sunny was familiar with all too well. However, now, things were different. The first time he had fallen into the sky below, he was alone and desperate, without any way to escape and no certainty of what awaited him below. This time he was surrounded by people, knew where he was going, and that they would be able to turn back at any point if need be. Not to mention that Sunny had a whole ship to explore, as opposed to plummeting down atop the corpse of a dead devil. The ancient vessel was not giant, but large enough to make their journey rather comfortable. There was an upper deck, the main cargo hold, the lower deck stretching from the bow to the middle point of the ship, the auxiliary cargo holds beneath it, and various compartments near the stern, including living quarters for the crew, 2 separate mess decks, a spacious captain's cabin, several smaller cabins that seemed as though they were meant for either guests or officers, a large war room, and a few service compartments. Currently, there were less than 30 people on board, so there was more than enough space for everyone. In fact, the vessel seemed rather empty and rough around the edges. The members of Cassie's cohort and other firekeepers that joined them to assist in the repairs had done a splendid job of restoring the flying ship's overall integrity, but had had no time to work on its interior. A few essential facilities had been haphazardly outfitted with everything necessary to barely function, but most of the compartments still required a lot of work. There was no furniture of any kind except for some crude tables, chairs, and flimsy hammocks, and most of the vessel looked empty and bare bones. It was a far cry from how luxurious it must have been furnished, outfitted, and decorated once in the ancient past. However, after the hellish month Sunny had spent in the Night Temple, this environment seemed almost like paradise. He had a whole cabin to himself, and the cargo hold was stocked with enough food and water to last them for a few months. The galley was also fully operational, so at least their meals were taken care of. More than that, the flying ship did not wobble constantly up and down like a seafaring one would, and instead swayed gently from time to time, which was sort of calming, and even a bit cozy. It was a strange vessel that moved partially due to sorcery, the sapling of a sacred tree growing around its mast, serving as the source of it, and partially due to the wind. The firekeepers seemed more or less capable of operating the sails, be it somewhat tentatively, and used either their aspects or memories, akin to Cassie's wooden staff, to produce gales that pushed the ship in the right direction. As the result, their descent into the abyss was swift, smooth, and almost relaxing. Sunny spent around a week slowly recuperating from his wounds, restoring his strength and resting. He slept a lot and ate as much as he could, knowing that the second nightmare was going to test the limits of his endurance. He had to enter it in as good of a shape as he could. He also used that time to think about what had transpired in the Night Temple, analyze everything he had learned about Mordred, and go over each of his thoughts and decisions, trying to learn from his mistakes. The memory of being fooled and manipulated by the Prince of Nothing still haunted him. There was also a lot of new information Sunny had received in that month. Information about the Awakened of higher ranks, Anvil of Valor, the great clans, the tension between them, and even about his own aspect. The silent shadows that dwelled in his soul sea were not there just for decoration. after all. He had always suspected that there was a purpose to them, but never had any proof. Well, now, there was proof. Sonny just had no idea what it all meant, and what he was supposed to do with them, no matter what he tried after the battle with Mordred. The shadows refused to react. They just stood in their usual spots, silent and lifeless just like before, as if pretending that nothing had happened. It was almost like he had imagined the whole thing. In the end, Sonny had to accept the fact that the mystery of the shadows was going to remain unsolved, for now. He had learned that his soul had a fearsome defense system against those who would try to possess it. That was something at least. After the first week, when his injuries healed enough, Sonny started training, slowly conditioning his body for the deadly trial ahead. This was somewhat of a useless process, really, since he would be inhabiting a different vessel entirely inside the nightmare. But training the body helped him put his mind in order as well. For that reason, Sonny practiced with the same ferocious determination as back in the Dark City. Kai, Effie, and Cassie joined him too, working on improving their own condition, as well as learning how to work together as a single unit again. It had been a long time since the four of them fought side by side. All of them had grown since then, both in terms of power and experience. They were awakened now, possessed new abilities, and had improved in their understanding of combat, technique, and skill. They needed to find new and better ways of enhancing each other's strengths and shielding each other's weaknesses, as well as cooperating seamlessly to achieve a common goal. Without the guiding hand of Changing Star, it was much harder than they had remembered. None of them was really a natural leader, let alone one as talented and gifted in the art of battle as Nephis had been back on the Forgotten Shore. Only now, faced with her absence, did Sonny understand how hard it actually was to build a powerful, cohesive, and effective cohort. Still, they did their best. A few days before they reached the rift in the divine flames, with the air outside of the flying ship already growing sizzling hot, Sonny woke up and stared into the darkness for a bit, then sighed and went to the galley to find something to eat. The food was tasty, but not very luxurious, and once again he failed to meet this day by drinking a cup of coffee with a lot of sugar and maybe even real milk, as he had wished to do once, a long time ago, in the cafeteria of the Awakened Academy before venturing into the dream realm for the first time. Today was the day of the winter solstice. Sonny had turned 19. Last time, he celebrated his birthday in a blood-soaked castle standing in the middle of a cursed city. This time, he was going to celebrate it aboard an ancient ship that flew through a lightless abyss, descending toward an ocean of flames. It is somewhat of an improvement, I guess. Chapter 600, The Departure. Sonny was not going to do anything special on that day, more so because the whole crew was in a bit of a melancholic mood. This was all of theirs first winter solstice after escaping the Forgotten Shore, so the firekeepers huddled together, remembering their fallen friends and wishing the young sleepers who were going to enter the dream realm come night well. However, Effie and Kai had other plans. It seemed that Cassie had told them that this was his birthday, so the huntress cooked up something special, and the four of them had a comparatively lavish dinner on the smaller mess deck, sharing the tales of what had happened to them in the past year and laughing about this and that. Laughter was much better than sorrow, especially considering that none of them knew when they would have an opportunity to laugh again. On the next day, the dark void around them was already hot enough to make moving on the upper deck hard. All of them dismissed most of their armor and worked the sails, their bodies glistening with sweat. Everyone worked together to keep the ship afloat and moving in the right direction, divided into two shifts. One would control the vessel, while the other retreated inside to cool off and drink water. Luckily, with the hot air blowing from below, they didn't need all of the sails to achieve their goal, which made things easier. It had taken Sonny almost a month to reach the divine flames before, but the flying ship made the journey faster. Using several aspect abilities and ingenious tools, they were also able to navigate the abyss with a sufficient level of precision, quickly reaching the tier and continuing to descend in a wide spiral. The memory of the golden string of fate was still burned into his mind. So, by knowing where the twisted rock had been located in relation to their position, Sonny was able to guide the ship toward the rift in the ocean of divine flames. By the evening, it was already visible, looking like a tiny black hole in the incinerating tapestry of furious light. However, the rift wasn't really that small. It just appeared so because of the distance. Sunny had almost missed it the first time, flying through the very edge of the rift and being burned by the divine flames. This time around, they were going to keep to the very middle of it, separated from the immolating orbs of white fire by many kilometers of empty space. Hopefully, that would be enough to keep them from dying of heat. The sails were hoisted, and the ship continued to plummet toward the flames, supported only by the sorcerous power of the sacred tree and the ancient enchantments permeating the hull. Sunny was left alone at the helm, the rest of the crew seeking shelter in the main cargo hold, where the air was coolest. He had summoned the undying chain and the memory of fire, augmenting the protective charm with all three of his shadows. As the flying vessel came closer and closer to the rift, the leaves of the young tree rustled above him, and ghostly runes suddenly appeared on the surface of the ancient ship. Slowly, the heat retreated a little. Standing on the upper deck was still hard and uncomfortable, but at least tolerable, especially with the help of his charm. Sunny carefully guided the vessel into the rift, keeping to the very center of it, as far away from the walls of divine fire as he could. It was as though he was guiding the ship through a vertical tunnel that twisted slowly, moving left and right, forward and back. Luckily, descending didn't require a lot of skill from the helmsman. Sunny was barely acquainted with how to steer a boat, let alone a flying one the size of a frigate, so he wouldn't have been able to do much if things went wrong. But they did not. Some time later, the ancient vessel left the rift and submerged into the darkness once again, the skies above burning like a sea of flame. He sent the ship flying toward the island that loomed in the void, not too far away, and let out a relieved sigh. They had made it. They moored the ship to one of the horizontal stone masts protruding from the island and disembarked. Walking across the obsidian pillar, everyone reached the solid ground and stopped, staring at the somber landscape in front of them in stunned silence. The ebony island was just as the last time Sunny had visited it. It was cut out of dark stone and floated in the endless emptiness, surrounded by drifting slabs of shattered obsidian. A tall and magnificent pagoda stood in its center, built of a flawlessly black, lusterless material that seemed to devour any light that touched it. Here and there, on the desolate surface of the island, remains of mysterious structures stood, long turned to ruins. Several obsidian pillars protruded horizontally from its edges, stretching into the empty void like strange wharves. The flying ship floated near one of them, fastened to it by strong chains. Effie stared at the ebony tower, then turned to Sunny, her face uncharacteristically pale. "I can't believe you made it all the way here alone. How did you even survive?" Sunny hesitated, then shrugged. "Barely, and with a bit of luck." With that, he sighed and headed toward the dark tower. Near its doors, it was time for the four of them to say goodbye to the firekeepers. Cassie's cohort and the rest were not going to follow them into the nightmare. Some would maybe challenge their own in the future, when they felt ready, but 1 year was really not enough to prepare most of Awakened for this harrowing trial. Instead, the firekeepers were going to remain on the Obsidian Island. Some were going to establish a temporary base there, while others would guide the flying ship back to the sanctuary of Noctis, and then return with more supplies and enough materials to continue working on the vessel itself. In that manner, they would travel between the sky below and the chained isles, awaiting the return of the challengers for as long as needed. The farewell was a bit emotional, at least on the part of the members of Cassie's cohort. She entrusted the command of it to Shim, the healer, and turned away, the silver half-mask obscuring her expression. No one knew if they were going to see each other again. For the survivors of the Forgotten Shore, parting with those who they cared about was nothing new. However, it never became easy. Sunny opened the gates of the Ebony Tower and guided the others into its dark halls, ascending one level after another. Effie and Kai were looking around, curiosity mixing with fear on their faces. Cassie paled terribly on the second level, where the harrowing rot had once grown from the severed arm of a deity, but did not say anything. The Hall of Runes affected her even worse. Kai and Effie were guided through it by Sunny, their eyes tightly shut, but the blind girl could not do the same. Her keen intuition and enhanced senses sometimes were akin to a curse. However, for that very same reason, her mental resilience was also unmatched. She gritted her teeth and persevered. Finally, they reached the last level and drowned the stone arch of the portal with divine flame, taking turns feeding their soul essence to the cruel sight. With their combined efforts, activating it did not take as long as when Sunny had tried to do it alone. Soon they were standing inside a graceful white gazebo, the portal disappearing behind them. In front of them, though, was the tranquil haven of the Ivory Island. Slates of shattered marble floated around it. There was a beautiful meadow near the gazebo and a peaceful grove of trees, their branches rustling under the gentle wind. Some distance away, connected to the gazebo by a stone path, stood the magnificent pagoda built out of pristine white material that was neither stone nor wood. It was beautiful, graceful, and slightly surreal, as if too sublime to exist in the mortal realm. And around it, the bones of a dead dragon lay, reflecting the radiant light of the sun. They walked past the clear lake and through the jaws of the great beast, finally entering the solemn darkness of the ancient Hall of Chains, where hope had once been bound. Once inside, the four of them froze, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue. 7 chains lay on the pristine white floor in front of them, each ending in a broken shackle. The shackles were marred and torn, their mangled surface inscribed with a myriad of runes. A strange shimmering rose from their surface in ethereal wisps, coalescing into a chaotic, ever-changing mass of pure darkness that pulsated in the very center of the great hall. But it wasn't darkness, not really. Instead, it was a second trial. He smiled darkly. Just like the first one. Well, let's see where I land this time. I doubt that it can be any worse than before. The voice of the spell thundered again, making him shiver. 5 brave ones, welcome to the nightmare. The darkness moved, turning into something else, something different. Sunny, however, was not paying attention. Wait, 5? Did it say 5? Who's the 5th one? What? He didn't get to finish that thought, though. His vision cleared, revealing